So from urgency comes responsibility. We're not on track to meet our 2030 targets. So if we don't, we won't meet our 2040 targets. The 1.5 degrees goes, and all we can say is we know bad things happen. Nobody knows how bad they will be. But hospitals are on the front line of this. So you're both dealing with the physical health and the mental health issues that Dr. Cohn referred to that are becoming more and more prevalent, are going to increase demand on your facilities. You are among the frontline workers dealing with the consequences of climate change. We're also a very big part of the problem. Greening the healthcare sector is an enormous source of greenhouse gas emissions. So for us, the healthcare sector is the most important of all the building types that we deal with, because you've got this paradox. You're a big part of the problem, you're a major part of the solution, and we've got work to do, and everyone in this room can contribute to dealing with let's do no harm. So the reality, governments can't solve this. They've got limited levers that they can use to move things forward. The policy instruments they've got are limited, and we can see they're not being successful. And we just need to accept the fact it comes down to all of us. We all have responsibility, every hospital to do its share, every individual to do its share. And when 8.2 billion people do their share, we will actually solve this problem. But looking to government to lead is not going to happen. We have that responsibility together to do that. Which presents the opportunity. So we know you're in the healthcare business. We know the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Well, we're doing harm right now. And we can't fix it all overnight, but we can fix a good part of it, and we can start tomorrow doing that. We spend a lot of time thinking about the 20 years that greening healthcare has been doing this, and the champions that have emerged from that. I'm not going to name them today, because if I name 5, I'm leaving out 20 others, but it's remarkable how many people in the healthcare sector have gone above and beyond what they need to do what they had to do because they could. And we all have things that we have to do because we can. So for me, the leaders, the champions, the heroes. My heroes are that group on the right-hand side below there from last year, and we've got another group which will get photographed today of the award winners. We've got 10 award winners today. 10 hospitals have got beyond 5% savings, which doesn't sound like very much, but it is. 5% means you've bent the curve, and that is not easy to do, and they are my heroes. That's what keeps us going. That's what makes us do what we do here. So we need 20 more heroes for next year. We need everybody in this room. We have 26 hospitals represented in this room. Need every one of you to commit to being one of the 20 hospitals that'll be on that list for next year. Humber River, we keep showing that. Humber River changed the game for hospitals, initially in Ontario, then in Canada, now in the United States. We have Michael here from Northwell. We have not been able to find any new hospital as efficient as Humber River so far. Cortellucci Vaughan followed on behind. Laurie Peller and what the team, and Bob Collins and the team at Humber River, they changed the game. Champions, going beyond what was the norm to make things happen that otherwise wouldn't have happened. They needed the persistence. So urgency, opportunity, responsibility. We hope that everybody will take that away today and say we need to get going, and we're responsible, and we need to get started now. So before we pass this to Amandeep and pass it to all of you, which is, let's start thinking about what we can do today, tomorrow, this year. Let's talk about what the range of that is. So if we have the opportunity to do cool things, and by the way, nothing feels better. I love the work I do. It's not easy, but man, you feel good at the end of the day. You go home and saying, we did actually make a difference today. And it comes in chunks, right? It's not every day. Things just keep improving. We have setback days like everybody, and then every now and again something great will happen, and very often with one of you, and makes it all worthwhile. But what can we all do starting tomorrow. First thing we got to acknowledge, everybody I think has seen this before, this is our giant ski slope. We have over 1,000 hospitals across North America and in the UK right now that we have data on. And every horizontal line here is a hospital. The blue bits are the electricity consumption, the orange bits are the thermal energy. You can see the orange bits are where so much energy is wasted, and guess what? That's where most of the greenhouse gas emissions come from. So the starting point is this is not complicated. Every one of the hospitals at the bottom of this chart has room to improve its energy efficiency in a cost-effective way. There's no cost justification for not doing this, and to achieve dramatic savings, often as much as 50% of the current energy use. It still shocks and amazes us how one building can be sitting there using 3 times as much energy as it needs. But that's the reality, and every hospital has its part to play within that. Our world, as you know, is we learn from the ones at the top, and that's the ones in the box, and we share it with the ones at the bottom. And if we can bring everybody in this curve to the right, we solve the problem, we get the job done. If you're a Greening Healthcare member, you know your ranking, you know what your savings potential is. You know, are you at the top of the chart, in the middle of the chart, at the bottom of the chart? And wherever you are, we've given you your number of how much you can save. Is it precise? Does it tell you exactly what to do? No. But it tells you can save $100,000 a year, or only $10,000 a year, or $1.5 million a year. We have 12 hospitals with savings potential of well over $1 million a year. That's crazy. And we know it's cost effective. We know if you invest in that, those operating cost savings come back to you. So you know your number if you're part of Greening Healthcare. If you're not, if you're a non-member hospital, send us your data. We'd be happy. We love data. We'd be happy to run the numbers for you and send them back to you. It's not that complicated doing what needs to be done. Amandeep's going to walk us through some of these things, and we apologize if it's kind of repetitive, but the majority of hospitals in the bottom half of that chart are not doing any of these things yet, and they haven't been able to work their way through to how to get started. How do we get rolling? So wherever you are on that particular journey, these are the things that need to be done. They're not complicated. We know how to do them, but it's really hard to do these things in operational hospitals with limited budgets and limited resources and all the barriers we hear over and over again, which is why I'm kind of excited with our panel this afternoon. That's going to talk about hospitals out there. How are you getting these things done? How are you bucking the trend? How are you getting past all the resistance internally and externally to doing things the way you already know how to do them? So not that complicated. We're going to update you on Enbridge gas. Enbridge, are our Enbridge friends in the room? Yeah, they are good. Enbridge is to be credited with North America generally, regulators, provinces and states, and utility companies tend to do what others are doing. It's not a space that rewards you for being inventive and pioneering. Enbridge has been quite remarkable at trying new things, and I give them credit for that. This is one, the feeling that even though every hospital is different, you've got different air handling systems, different uses, different occupancies. You've all got a boiler plant, and that boiler plant, every one that we've ever looked at, has all kinds of room for efficiency improvement that's not happening. Again, cost effective, and you've got boiler service contractors that know exactly how to do that work. So what Enbridge is trying to do here with Greening Healthcare is close that gap. How do you get all of the ideas put together in one place, and then how do you make the business case so the hospital can say, that makes sense, and I'm confident the savings will be there and I can do this. So the BPOP, brand new boiler plant optimization program is underway, and we have 2 pilots. Eddie is here today. I think Southlake is here today. Hand up if you, yeah. So our 2 pilots are Etobicoke General and Southlake, and we'll be rolling this out. If one of your hospitals is on this list right now, you'll be hearing from Carolyn or or Michael shortly about your interest in participating. Enbridge is funding 8 hospitals to go through this program. There are 17 on here that are candidates. And we're excited to get this moving. And the idea that we can get through every single hospital boiler plant in Ontario by 2030, that would be a remarkable contribution to the cause here. So BPOP's up and running. You're all being asked, on top of everything else, running aged facilities with limited budgets and limited resources. And oh, by the way, while you're at it, could you help us deal with this energy transition thing? Because we're going through the biggest transition in human history as we move from that. I love this slide because we don't remember the happy days of sail and wood and animal power. But at the end of the 20th century, it was a really easy transition to the miracle of hydrocarbons. Like gas and oil and coal, they get a bad knock, but man, 150 years ago, they were a miracle. All the things we could do, we could never do before, lifting people out of poverty, driving the growth of the world, until we found, oh, that's not such a good thing after all. Now we're trying to deal with a much harder transition from fossil fuels to electrification, whether it's vehicles or whatever. It's going to happen, it's on its way, and it's happening really, really fast, and it affects your plant. So we've been through this construct before. You've got building systems in every hospital. You've got conventional plants that look like steam boilers and gas boilers and exhaust air and discharge water. You've got all those things happening. And we need to transition really quickly to that all being changed out. Heat recovery on every exhaust system coming out of the hospital. Heat recovery chillers on just about every hospital. All of these things are coming, they're coming fast. You've got governments and utilities who want you to do these things, but you're going to have to manage that transition, and it's not going to be easy. Finally, we're going to talk today, as I mentioned, about new hospital performance. Again, these are all brand new hospitals. So this is like the chart we had before, but this is pulling out the subset of hospitals built since 2015 across the country. We're doing this work with Natural Resources Canada to figure out how are they actually operating. You can see there that the top group of hospitals are continuing care facilities. The most energy efficient acute care hospitals are Humber River and Cortalucci Vaughan right there. Cortalucci Vaughan learned what they learned from Humber, and they got it right the first time. Awesome stuff, world class, world leading. We talked to the National Health Service about how did that come together and how can we share that information with them so they can do the same thing. So this is another big story. So what we're hoping to get out of today, and it depends entirely on you. Hopefully we do a decent job of presenting the information we have to share. But we're hoping today, and we'll revisit this afternoon, that there will be individual and collective commitment, that nobody will leave here saying, that was really interesting, I hope these guys do something. Everybody has a part to play in this, and we hope everybody will walk away with the idea that if what we're doing right now is what changes are needed, and the panel discussions today are intended to help you think that through. I hear what those guys did. How does that apply to my situation? We hope everybody will leave here knowing where they stand. Every hospital should know, are they at the top, in the middle, or at the bottom of those charts, and act accordingly. We hope that we will hear a lot back from you. So coming out of the session follows this, we'll be looking for feedback from you on, yeah, that's a good idea, but what gets in the way? What are we struggling with? Where can we help each other? This is all about peer learning today, and this is a peer group session coming up. So we need to hear back from you. And at the end of the day, again, please stay with us if you can. We know everybody's busy, but we would like to hear back from you on your specific takeaways. I heard this is a good idea. I really want to give this a try. And then we will be there with our energy support team to give you whatever help you need to move forward. Nobody's going to get stuck going out. You just have to make that commitment. And this is one of our 2 in-person events every year, and we love it, and thank you again for taking the time to come. network with each other, rub shoulders, meet people you haven't spoken to before. There's a million stories in this room that you need to hear. So let me pass this over to Amandeep to begin us down the track of working together to get things done, working together and with our new energy support team people.
So the first track is the energy efficiencies, operational measures that everyone can act now. So let's put the first question on, please. All right, so you should see on your phone the HU unoccupied setback. And this is when we look at the data and look this across all the hospitals, we still find majority of them hasn't applied or sort of at least implemented these. So these are your options here. So the option B, implemented on a few systems but never scaled. That is an interesting one. Implemented across most eligible AHUs, 27%. That's just to kind of give you a context, previously when we ran these kind of polls, we've noticed that number would be way lower, but having it at 20%, it seems promising. So we're going in the right directions as we see this. Stalled under budget or internal technical resources implemented is 12%. Haven't started, we don't know where to begin is only 5%. So hospitals who have answered 5%, I think you have a lot of resources here in this group today, and that's where we will focus on to sort of help you make sure that Gurney Healthcare is there to support that, start that conversation with them. So I think we have all the answers. So this is kind of the survey that currently looks like. It's a mixed response, as you could see that, like highlighted with implemented on few systems but never scaled. That's something what's coming out, but equally important, implemented across most eligible AHUs. So I'm going to go to Yashraj and Ian. One of you, if you want to summarize what you heard on your table.
Yeah, so I spoke with the executive team at both Markham Stouffville and Sinai, and what I've heard was that D kind of resonated the most right now, but it's because we kind of need to set up a plan and an organized plan on how we can move forward with implementing the scheduling setback.
Controls limitations was flagged, but I think we spent the most time just talking about the proper mapping of zones and air handling units, understanding what are even the requirements for different systems, having set points set appropriately, and just the legacy of renovations and complexity with additions that makes it just really challenging to even know what can be set back and what can't.
Hello. Yeah, so to summarize our table, it was across the board. For example, for Sunnybrook, right? Controls was an issue. And then we can see a contrast between like Sick Kids and Sunnybrook, because Sick Kids is a newer hospital. So for older hospitals, what do you do with like legacy systems and also existing buildings? Like how do you turn off a system that's running? So that's kind of the gist of our table.
Thanks, Gideon.
In our table, we discussed about some of the implementation that they've done, like they've successfully scheduled the AHUs, and we were continuing on that discussion about how they set up the AHUs and how they implemented it. And in other hospitals, from their experience, I think some managers are new to the hospital, so they do not know fully to the extent where this kind of a measure has been implemented. And so, some of the challenges that was raised is a budgetary constraints, and also not being familiar with the measure as well.
Awesome. Just touching on, I think the budgetary piece, there's, as we have ISO and Enbridge here as well, which are strong supporter of implementing operational measures. So there's programs out there that actually get you make a business case for these measure implementation, which successfully has been, and we'll talk about more in our panel discussion as well, where it's already currently being used and implemented with those processes. Okay. So moving on to our next question. The next question is around the boiler plant optimization. So we talked about the program itself, but the boiler plant is a key piece in your facility to optimize the gas consumptions in your building. So the boiler plant looks at, I mean, there's many measures that are considered. Your VFDs on air, on the blower motors, draft dampers, controls, automatic sequencing of the boilers, and auto trim. So these are some of the measures that already have been sort of published, and we also have a guide with the Greening Healthcare that talks about implementing these measures, and the boiler plant optimization program is also part of this. So as I can see the responses coming in, there's how do you approach these different measures and in your current sort of existing plans and what you have done to date? So it's kind of talks about individual measures getting implemented, tuning and maintenance and tuning only, or you'll be looking at it as a resource that your boiler plant service contractors, that you can make them as a resource to implement these measures. So I will give it a few more minutes before the answer comes in. So then we'll do the same thing as move this to the tables itself and have a conversation among yourself in terms of what you see so far. So it appears 60, there's a dominant answer is, which is a B, individual measures are getting implemented, but not a cohesive approach. So those of whoever answered A, which is complete plan review in last year's, all measures assessed together, actions implemented. We want to talk to you as well, because we want to see there's results that are coming out of this. So one of the things we noticed with boiler plant optimization is that there were projects implemented, but when we looked at the savings on the utility meter, it didn't show up. So we had a conversation with Thermogenics and at Eastside and looking around even with South Lake, like, what happened here? So then they actually went back and looked at it, and then they fixed certain things, and the savings starts to appear. So it's sometimes not always that you implement certain things and you expect the savings. The key thing is, are you doing kind of an M&V on that as well to make sure? So if you answered that sort of as an option A, I would highly recommend you to sort of connect with us after this, and then let's look at the baseline and let's look at the M&V data to make sure that the implemented measures are getting the savings.
Yeah, in the discussion we had on our table, it kind of stayed between B and C. Primarily with C because we had some concerns with controls that came up and making sure they have the right controls to make sure the plan is operating properly. And then we had another interesting point brought up that one of the sites have their plant on a contract base with the vendor, so it's difficult for them to get them to cooperate on some measures, and they're currently just providing support and occasional recommissioning every couple of years.
That's interesting because part of this community is to make sure the industry is supporting this initiative. So that will be some of the lessons learned, that kind of conversation going back. We know there's been supporters of this initiatives here from the industry side, but there's more conversation that needs to happen. Chantal?
So we said that if we have like the whole checklist for the boiler plants, like all the measures to implement, the challenge would be like the financial part of it. So how to implement the whole thing and to go through. And we discussed also like having a regular good maintenance with the boiler service provider maybe would help us have like this like efficient boiler running, and that was it.
Thanks. As Ian kind of pointed out that earlier, that BPOP program, which is Enbridge supporting that conversation, so and funding it as well, that is the starting point of optimizing these boilers plant as a kind of a comprehensive measure. So we've kind of shared the initial list, but that program is expected to expand across other hospitals. So if there isn't an interest, you can always reach out to us later as well. And I heard Mark brought 2 bags of dollars for this incentive program to be shared with the rest. Yeah, I see thumbs up. So there's tons of money with Enbridge right now. If you guys want to grab it, that's yours, there's a chance. So the next one is a lighting. we've seen lighting, as you see the transition happening from TH fluorescent to LED. There's obviously the new hospitals that are constructing are getting LEDs, but then the existing and legacy systems are still getting replaced. And there's a lot of work that's currently getting done in these facilities. There's an aspect of changing these lightings in a different ways. Like we've seen hospitals do ballast and ramp replacement. In some cases, they do fixture replacements. In other cases, just fixture replacement with no controls, and sometimes it's fixture replacement plus controls. And then when the whole package is put time, sometimes the lighting plus controls, and then nobody looks at the controls afterward because it's something set on site and not fully used. So there's still an opportunity in the lighting itself. There is, and as kind of the demand issue at the grid becomes more and more, so the lighting is going to give us that opportunity to reduce the overall building demand as we do through that transition. And in case of Mike's and Northwell, this is going to become a bigger piece because their facilities in some cases don't have even the capacity to put a centrifugal chiller. So they've been running some of these buildings on steam turbine chillers for almost 3 decades. So for them to create this extra demand and use that demand towards adding a heat recovery chiller is going to be key. So as the answer comes in, lighting is largely complete, but no control strategy is currently leading that discussion. Partial conversion, business case, capital stalled part way, 38%. LED conversion with the controls is 11%, and early stage not started is 3% as well. We also have ISO representative here, and Vicky's here too. And we had a sort of a previous discussion around what can we do further with the lighting, and the controls is another piece that we're already looking at, is to incentivize some of the control work, which eventually will let us to further optimize these lighting systems. So next section before we go there, I'm going to pick up on a couple of my team members. Let's start with Gideon.
Thank you. Just to summarize what we discussed in our table, some hospitals have already implemented the LED conversion with the controls, and they're seeing savings within 6 months, a significant amount of savings. So that's a good learning opportunity from them to talk about how they implemented the strategy, that they have automatically shut off the lights at a certain point in time, and then if there's an occupant in the room, it would turn on. So that's a good learning discussion we had there. And then there are some hospitals that still are considering these LED upgrades and not sure about the status as well, how they would go about doing this.
Okay. And if you have any questions, I'm going to pick Vicky on spot as well. Vicky's here and Fab is here today as well. So anything with a couple of those programs and how they apply, please feel free to reach out to them during the networking breaks as well. Harry, you have a lot of experience doing this, and you had a whole team implementing these lighting projects across. Can you share some of that with us?
Hello?
Yeah.
And just for point of reference, I'm from Alberta, so we have our organization does all the healthcare throughout the whole province. We're provincial. And so we have converted about 76% of our total asset base, about 3 million square meters, to LED. But what we've done is, for the most part, we've retained the existing fixtures, at least for the fluorescent, and put in new electronic ballasts and LED lamps. The lamps are down to 9.5 watts each, so we find the payback a little better. And I'm keeping a shell of a fixture, which is nothing wrong with it. I don't want to set it to the landfill. We do some fixture replacements too, but that's kind of our typical one. And then we put in a quick disconnect right away for the maintenance folks. So if they, because our circuit panels are not labeled properly, so if they have to replace something, they can just shut off right at the fixture, and then also we have to get the fixtures recertified as per CSA. So that's kind of for the bulk what we've done. What we find is because the power usage is going down drastically, the controls portion becomes very expensive because you don't get the payback anymore. Like, it wasn't like you had the T12, so you had a significant amount of savings. Now, because the fixture is so efficient, the advantage to turn it down becomes less. costly, or more costly, terrible payback.
Yeah, the existing buildings has always been challenging with running the control cables through an existing infrastructure. But what we see a lot of the times, when the departments get redeveloped and everything is gutted out, and in those cases, the standard spec is usually with the controls as well. But the challenge is what we typically see is that those controls are never used to optimize the lighting control. It's there, it exists, but nobody knows where to log in and sort of optimize that system. That's usually a missed opportunity we see in most of these lighting conversions.
Yeah. A lot of our hospitals have the old Douglas lighting panels. Of course, they're not around anymore. You can't get parts. So that's kind of one of the challenges we have. So we're trying to do some replacements on those as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Harry. All right, let's move on from energy efficiency, and now we're going to go to the asset management. So as we know, the transition, we talked about the transition, had we had all the capital, everybody in this room would have already started, would have loved to do these. But we know that the challenge with that, and if we don't use the capitals smartly, we can't break the cycle of like for like. So the next session is sort of based on how do we break this cycle of replacing these equipment to do like for like, and rather than think outside the box and do something differently. So asset renewal, breaking the sort of the cycle of like for like. So if we can't do that, then we're stuck in this, and there's going to be stranded asset in your facilities, which will not help you sort of contribute to reduce emissions. So the next few questions are designed to have that discussions with the team. So starting with the first one, assets end of life, what are you going to do? And these are some of the options that you currently have. Oh, wow. So I'm pretty sure that's not going to be the answer, but let's, I hope it is, but let's see when the answers roll in. So low carbon alternative payback works, intent is there. So as you can see, there's a consensus in this crowd here, or is that if given an option and the payback works, the preferred option is to go with a low carbon alternative, which is actually what we would expected in these scenarios. However, the challenging part is how the current system is set up, which is only tracking like for like in your current system. So when does the renewal triggers? Because that's going to be the answer to your first question. The intent is right, but can you actually deliver it? And this is the question that's going to help you answer that, because with the low carb, I'm not going to sort of preamble the answer to this. Let's see what the audience says. So if you can, please fill in the survey, that will be great. So this is around when your major mechanical systems get renewed, what does typically happen in current scenario? And ideally there might be a different scenario you might think about, but what is actually currently happening, and the thought-provoking in this is how do you make that change happen? Okay, so I'm now going to bring the discussion back to the table where the first answer was that the intention is that if they're given the options that the payback works, you're going to do low carbon. But now, if you look at the trigger point here, the option B has dominated, which means that equipment failure, imminent breakdown forces that decision. So those two don't connect with each other. If you think through this, is that if you're doing at the point when it's imminent breakdown, the low carbon needs a planning. It's not going to happen as a like-for-like solution. So your intent of doing this as a low carbon with a payback will not work if it's a reactive. So that's a discussion we guys want to have at the tables, is now how do you connect those two? Because right now there's a gap here with the majority of the hospitals answering that they're only going to do the equipment replacement as a reactive means, which means that it's definitely going to get a like-for-like solution. It's not going to get an alternative path solutions in most cases. There's a lot of lively discussion on this. I'll start with Ian.
Yeah, well, I guess speaking from Sinai Health, I'll do my best to explain. What I heard is it's not necessarily as black and white as imminent breakdown. Versus planned. You know, you tend to see the writing on the wall. You often do have some time, 6 to 12 to 18 months to squeeze some life out of equipment. Maybe maintenance costs go up during that period, but there typically is enough time to do some assessment, to do some planning. But I mean, and then I think we kind of fell at the end of the conversation to just the capital constraints on what we'd like to do versus what we can do. And I guess we didn't quite finish that part of the conversation, but that was where it ended.
Fair enough. Mohit?
Hello. So we had a mixed response. So one of the things coming out is that the hospital, they have capital plan. So they are intending to have a planned asset and based on their budget and capital plan. For the other responses, the lack of staff and time because busy day-to-day operations. So that's what we have.
Okay, thanks. Farzad?
Yeah, so it was mixed between being I think in an ideal situation it would be planned, but the reality is it's usually just reactive and a lot of things are dictated by the ministry. So, but when you can replace it, if the payback is there, they would choose low carbon. That was a general consensus for our table.
Okay. All right, let's give them the time. I'm going to go to the next question because this also ties in to this discussion as well. Most of you probably either, I think in the last 4 years, Roth IMA has probably been on your side to do a building condition assessment. So this question is based on the building condition assessment because as you probably already know that the building condition assessment sets the hospital to get sort of qualify for the HERF funding. And depending upon how it's currently done, what are some of the responses that you give as a feedback to their team to ensure that your assets are properly tagged and the replacement values are properly in the system, that information flows back to the ministry to determine what's your share is going to be on the HERF funding for each of these hospitals. I'm pretty sure there's other factors into it, but the key part of the data that they currently use in all of this is driven from the site. When they come on site, they take all those assessments, they put that back into their system, and based on that information goes back to the ministry, and there's certain decisions are based on that. So there's certain times we notice gaps, there are certain times there's opportunities to even make this fine. So this question is around what is the current process in your facility and actually who's involved, and are you looking at these data number when the assessment happens, and does that track back to your facility condition index? Eventually leads to a better outcome. Typically, when we talk to these folks, they've told us to date that it's a like-for-like replacements that they budget in their current assessments. It doesn't mean that there's not option or rooms to do improvements, but that's what we want to hear back from you and sort of take this discussion back to these folks and also to the ministry around what can we do to improve this system. So we break this cycle of like for like and then tend to do better with this asset replacement. So far what we're seeing is none of we separately managed from energy planning, which is interesting. I know who met, so okay, sorry, it's just, and then the next answer that dominant facility, energy or facility staff have input into asset replacement cost estimates. So as you could already see, there's mixed responses. There's not consistency among hospitals how this current assessment is tackled in each of these hospitals, and which does both. Like it provides the challenges and it also provides the opportunity to do it in a better way. So, and as you notice that the asset renewal is the biggest piece in transition. So if we can't get this right, we're going to left with stranded assets, and that's not good for anybody else, right? So, or everybody else as well. So. I will open, I think most of the answers that came in, as you can see, mostly is dominated with, is managed separately, which is, it's a concern because if the BP assessment doesn't have a feedback from the facility team, then the likelihood of getting that funding for an alternative solution is going to be very less, because then you're still in that cycle of replacing the asset with like for like, because that process of providing that additional information to the ministry didn't come through. So this will be a discussion at your table now to talk about what sort of feedback you have for us, and internally, what can we do to sort of improve this process? And maybe there is something we need to take back to the ministry and talk to them about changing that process that help all these hospitals. So if you can answer this question, we won't bring this back to table discussion, but we want to understand what's the current sort of approach that you take as a hospitals to plan these capital renewal projects. So give it a minute or just less than a few seconds before we get computers as we get some answers. As you could see, 3 to 5 years capital plan exists, which is really great news because then it just ties to the asset renewal plans. Okay, I think we have the answers on this, and this has been a great session. And what we're going to do is we will prepare all these responses and get back to you with our feedback as well, and also a summary of this to all these discussions. Thanks for your participation. Ian's going to have a couple of more comments, and then we will go to a networking break after this.
Great session, everybody. Thank you. These are always leaps of faith for us. You know, it's in my dreams, there's always, we put it out there and everybody's looking at us and nobody wants to talk to each other and so on. And the way you guys engage is really, really helpful. And again, that's where we learn from coming out of this. Looking forward to the closing session this afternoon, just wanted to close the loop on a couple of things that I was hearing there. HVAC scheduling is the source of half the total savings we're looking for everywhere. So HVAC scheduling is it, and we got non-clinical spaces, and when you get that right, then the clinical spaces, and working sequentially through that. And what we've learned over the last while, you know, from Mike Gentili here with Northwell, they've got a very sophisticated process, online process, where they poll the departments that, or departmental groups that are using the spaces that are involved. They come back with how do they use it, when do they use it. They're fully engaged. They're actually enthusiastic about the process. They sometimes come back and say, you know, when are we going to be doing my system? So that engagement, I think what Northwell has done is exceptional. And if you have a chance, have a chat with them about what that looks like. So working through a huge hospital, 120 air handling systems, takes time. You work your way through. The other, you know, Mike Lithgow, so day for Mike's today. I'm just intrigued with the difference between older facilities and newer facilities. If you've got older facilities like some of those at Sunnybrook, their handling units are old. They got control system limitations. They got electrical limitations. They got infrastructure. They're not in great shape. So old facilities, this is much harder than new facilities. You've got brand new systems, bringing scheduling in should be, you won't have a lot of that pain that you run into, which what should have been a $500,000 project winds up being a $2.5 million project because everything around the system has to be brought up to date. So there's real differences here, but the message we want to leave is there's no plan B here. We have to work our way through, and we have to start tomorrow. Start with the easy stuff. You've got an auditorium or a cafeteria administration. Start there, but that's not the end of the game. You'll get into the clinical spaces. You'll be engaging clinicians. And by then, because of the climate crisis is what it is, they're probably going to be enthusiastic. So the scheduling was interesting. The boilers, the program that's coming up, can the Enbridge folks raise their hands? Why are you at the same table? Some mystery, okay. You've got a room full of customers here. Connect with Enbridge around boiler plant optimization. Doing things at the same time, it always runs into the capital issue. Now I got to find $300,000. But if 100,000 of it perhaps comes from Enbridge, and sometimes there's electrical savings, there's incentives there, there's a payback, there's a business case to be made. Chat with those guys today, because all of that will happen within the next few years. All of your boiler plants will be upgraded. And lighting controls, we picked up on that, and Vicky, you know, Vicky and Fab, are you here? Yeah, there's Fab and Vicky. Touch base with them, because lighting controls for us is the new treasure. Everybody's doing LED, sometimes in different ways, sometimes better or worse, but the controls is where we think the next big opportunity is. So we'll come back to that this afternoon. In terms of the asset management thing, what I heard back didn't match with what we're hearing from some of, so shall we say, the more progressive among our members here about how can you actually use HERF and the building condition assessment to implement your plan, not just to fix things when they're broken. And if you're going to implement your decarbonization plan, I was struck by Maria at Oak Valley. You know, the heat recovery wheels, the thermal wheels were in bad shape. They were central to the decarbonization of the plant, and so they got prioritized. So the idea of you're planning your low carbon future rather than just letting stuff break and do the best you can with the time available. That having a strategic plan, you've got the vision, you know where you're going, and every capital project is a chance to move down that pathway. That's such a big deal. And we've got other examples here. You know, Tracy's here. I don't know if Andrew Blair is with us this morning, but Andrew has been a master at working. This is what we need, and let's find a way to make the business case that it will get funded as part of our program. So those were the big ones for me coming out of this. We've got, again, we'll be coming back to summarize the whole story at the end of the day. Meanwhile, we've got a coffee break and looks like some delicious stuff there. Take the break and we'll be back for new construction, the latest news from the best of the new hospital projects that are coming on stream. So see you at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So the next session as we for today's this morning before we break for lunch is the new construction and redevelopment panel. So Gurney Healthcare, as Ian touched on previously, through Natural Resources Canada and Core Acceleration Fund, we have been studying the recently built hospitals across Canada. So, which is to understand why some of the hospitals are performing well, whereas the similar hospital, similar vintage in terms of the solutions that are applied on them are turning out to be hospitals with a lot of opportunities. So today what we lined up for you is a session where we're going to talk about a success story. And then there's a few more, as we said, as we sort of scan through the rest of the country around trying to understand how we can document these high performance and underperforming hospitals to learn from them and then share those learning across the industry. So next time we build a new hospital or even do a redevelopment within an existing hospital, we try to apply those principles that should always sort of lend in theory to a high performance department in a hospital as well. So today's focus of session's focus is going to be on West Park, and we have this panel join us. So we have Ryan Chang, Director, Contract Management at University Health Network. We have Joe Cody from Alice Downs Facility Services. And we have Fabio from BPA, or you probably heard of TMP. Am I allowed to say that? Okay. All right, so let's start this discussion. So I have this here. I'll bring in Ryan into this discussion. Start with Ryan. Can you give us a bit of an overview of Center?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, West Park is relatively new. We moved in 2024, in the summer of 2024. We're 730,000 square feet. There's 6 stories there, and we have quite a bit of land. We moved in, we have 27 acres of land there, around 314 to 316 inpatient beds. And it's part of UHN West Park. I just joined this team last fall, coming from Sinai Health. And we specialize in clinical services for rehabilitation, continuing care, and long-term care as well.
Yeah, one of the things I want to mention about, and which we'll touch on, is the complex continuing care piece, right? That's, I think, is unique to West Park, if I'm not wrong. Like a lot of the other sites that you typically hear are either continuing care, mental health, but this complex continuing care is one type of facilities, which we're even studying it further as we go through this. So where this all started is like, how did we come across West Park? And as I mentioned, the research that we're currently going on through the Natural Resources Canada and Court Acceleration Fund, where Climate Challenge Network Greening Healthcare is looking at facilities across Canada that are recently built. And on your sort of, this is a benchmarking chart, which compares right now, there's acute care sites on it, there's continuing care, ambulatory care sites. Different color coding, each bar represents the EUI for these sites. And also we put in the NECB 2020, sort of what NECB is saying about their hospital EUI should be. As you could see, West Park is currently at the top of the benchmarking chart. However, there's a lot to be learned from this chart. As you could see, there's majority of the hospitals that are towards the sort of the bottom end of this benchmarking chart, which tells us that the facilities that were built in this time frame since 2015, they didn't all turn out to be energy efficient from day one. So there's a lot of learning, and that's what we're doing, and we'll be bringing those case studies of the underperforming hospitals as well, so we can all learn together from this. But today we're going to kind of look at what worked at West Park. So the principles that when we do this analysis around hospitals, we look at a couple of things. The previous chart was based on the utility data, but we also look at how these hospitals are performing compared to the energy subcomponents. So these subcomponents, when they add up to a target, and that target becomes a standards for greening healthcare and standards for other hospitals to try to achieve. So in this case, when you look at the greening healthcare high performance target under subcomponent levels, and then also for electricity and thermal, you're looking at around 19.7. So just a caveat here, this 19.7 total energy is for a continuing care hospital. So that's the benchmarking we currently have, is for continuing care, acute care, ambulatory care, and mental care. So the complex care, that's why I sort of stressed initially, is the one that's in between the acute and the continuing care. So there's comparisons, but there is also comparisons or differentiators that from continuing care. So when you go through this list, as you could see, the most of the categories here, the chillers, the pumps, lighting, those are the categories that West Park is either achieved or near achieving those greening healthcare high performance targets. I'll come back to the fans in a second. And as you could see, the process load is expected, because of the complex care, is expected to be higher for this hospital compared to a continuing care hospital. So that's why those components are higher. If you go down the thermal energy between domestic hot water, humidification, and this is a unique facility where the sterilization, not unique, but the sterilization is all electric, whereas in the standards that we currently have, high performance, sterilization is all gas. But you could see in most of the categories, the targets have been either achieved or near, except two, which is we'll talk about. There's 4 more opportunities on the fans, and there's a bit more opportunity in the space heating. But as you could see, getting to if you look at from a emission perspective, especially in Ontario, having a thermal load as low as 9.6 equivalent kilowatt per square foot is your starting point to decarbonize any building. So if you are already at that high performance target, it's way more easier to decarbonize from this versus running an EUI of 20 or 30 on a thermal site. So, and again, this session is like, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in at any time. We will try to sort of take those as they come along. But this is kind of principles and the stories of this. And also, if anybody's interested in learning more about these targets, you could download this white paper that we published on greening healthcare high performance targets, and it's available for anybody to use it. All right, let's talk about the journey here. So I'm going to bring in Joe and Fabio to discussion. So Joe and Fabio work together on this site, starting the commissioning phase. Maybe Joe, you want to pick it up first and talk us about your journey of getting this hospital to these numbers, as where you started and how it went, and what are some of those things that were kind of obvious, but they were not obvious. Maybe you can start with that. Yeah.
Yeah. we've had a lot of experiences commissioning, I guess we could call this commissioning, seasonal commissioning or post-substantial completion commissioning with varying degrees of success. And we've kind of like learned from our past projects on how to do it quickly. So at West Park, we did something unique that we didn't necessarily do at a lot of other facilities and it's really credit to our design team and our construction partners. They took the initiative of not only striving for substantial completion, but also rallying the team together to achieve our targets. So within the first year, we had weekly and biweekly meetings of construction folks, consultants, contractors, and facilities teams actively reviewing our data, understanding where we stood relative to our targets, our internal, because we do have an energy model at this facility, and doing quarterly updates on that model to understand what the progress that we were making and how it's being met relative to our model. So that's contrast to a typical approach where normally this drags on for a couple of years. We were able to make a considerable amount of change within the first 3 to 4 months. And within a year, we were surpassing our model, so which is great. And I guess, Amity, to your point, some of those biggest drivers are, one is the optimization of the chiller and ventilation. So here you can see that it is a complex or is a continuing care facilities, but there's a mixture of outpatient and inpatient portions. So where we could in those outpatient parts of the building, we set back local VAVs. And then actually, I can maybe pass it to BPA that during the initial period looked at the static pressure set points during occupied and unoccupied times to set back set points or static pressure set points to make sure that fans are running as low as possible during those unoccupied periods.
Yeah, before you jump in, before you do, sorry, I should have explained this graph. So what you see on this graph is a typical AHU profile for a week, and you could see the peaks and valleys. So the peaks is during the day when the system comes down, and then the valleys is when the system's, the setback mode happens. So that, in order to kind of reach that level, that's where this conversation, and Fabi, we can probably kind of comment on that. How was that process to get to that stage? And I think sometimes we have a prep call on this, and there's always assumptions in these cases that our systems is set up and it should work that way, but that wasn't the case when you guys looked at it, and then you have to do changes to that. Can you walk us through what was it that process looks like?
Yeah, we got to look at all the data that was available to us, which was a significant amount, and it started to show some opportunities for maybe further improvements. And like Amandeep said, the requirement for the facility was to have setbacks, and that was achieved originally just with VAVs turning down in each zone. So a given room would have a setback, it turned down at night, but really the assessment didn't trace its way back to that source equipment. So what we did, and we being BPA, TMP, Modern, Elaston, we dove in there in the evening and actually assessed how much further could we reduce our central system. So maintain those schedules, let those VAVs do what they're supposed to do, but what other savings can we gain from this? And it was a bit of a detailed kind of a deep dive into all those numbers and kind of those moments, but it helped us throttle back the static pressure set points on our headered system. And there was a few tells, whether it was dampers at our 7 air shafts that are in the facility. So a couple of these pieces here shows that it was relatively complicated facility to work on, but looking at those, we started kind of trimming ourselves back, and eventually we got to a pretty improved system. Yeah.
Thanks, Fabio. I'm gonna bring Ryan to this discussion, and we'll go back into the technical piece. Ryan, so as you see that experience on the sort of the patient and clinical side, what was your kind of, when these things were happening in background, like what was your experience from the clinical side or even the patient side in terms of any sort of issues or anything that highlights for you during this time frame when the commissioning was actually happening and things were moving in the right directions?
So even personally for myself, I wasn't there during the commissioning stage. As I've spoken to my colleagues that were there, you know, there's in the beginning, there's always, you know, getting used to the system, getting used to the programs, but for the most part, you know, people have a pretty good experience. You know, when they're not there, they're not going to notice that everything's off. All they know is that when they are there, everything's working very well. But I've heard positive things about the way we have things set up, and even during the time when this is all being implemented.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to skip this slide, Joe, because I know we'll come back to this. Let's talk about one of the other elements of the success in this is the integration of the central plan. And as you know, these plans are getting more complex with every building. And the key component, it used to be previously, you would have a chiller plant, you would have a boiler plant, they don't talk to each other, they do whatever they do individually. But now, this integration of the central plant where your chiller and the boiler plant is connected through heat recovery chillers, the complexity that's coming along with that, it sometimes results in underperformance. Like that's what we're documenting in some of these underperforming hospitals where the design intent was correct, but then operations controls, everything led to where system would not work or systems were that heat recovery chiller would not work. But in this case, I want to bring it back to Joe, and then I'll get in Glenn to comment on it because you have a lot of experience with these machines. So Joe and Fabi, what did you guys learn through this process, and what were some of the changes or the initial things that we found that you have to make improvements on to make the system work?
Yeah, Fabi and I were just talking about this before we came up, and there's a lot of different programming that we've tried during that initial period to get us to where we are right now. And it's really important to partner with a competent controls contractor and technicians that have done this before and know how to do it. As you can see here from the slide, we have 2 heat recovery chillers, and on the top left, there's a table showing the air handling units. What's important to these systems is they call it enhanced heat recovery, but it's basically extracting as much heat as you can from your exhaust stream to maximize the usage of the heat recovery chillers. And getting that sequences to work just right can be complicated, but partnering with a controls contractor that's familiar with that and going through different iterations is important. So this table here kind of shows you that you really want the wheels to be running at or near 100% for the majority of the time. There's some exceptions to that, but to ensure that you're recovering as much heat as you can and minimizing the usage of your boilers. So, but yeah, I just say stress don't undermine the importance of a good controls contractor and technician.
Glenn, you've been on both sides where you were given this machine and it didn't work out. And then you have to spend time and brain and everything else. Can you provide a bit of context on that? And then your lessons learned from integration of the heat recovery chillers into these buildings?
Thanks very much. Yeah, to Joe's point, the integration of a heat recovery chiller into one of these plants is a wildly complex endeavor, and you need a controls technician who understands both the design intent and the operation of the building. That can be a bit of a challenge. Historically, the industry had a bit of a mixed track record in the actual implementation, but thankfully we're seeing more and more, you know, particularly with the P3 service providers, is where I have most of my exposure. We're seeing an uptick in that level of integration and the development of the sequences for energy recovery. So that, I think, in a large part is why we're seeing these assets coming online more efficiently than we did in the early days of heat recovery. Fought with one of these plants myself for a couple of years in a prior role, and I can say very rewarding when you finally get them working properly, but it's a very painful road to get there. There's a lot of trying something new and then throwing out everything you know and trying something different until you find the right recipe for the building that you're in.
I want to make sure the numbers we were talking about here, and most of them, as you could see, so if you go back to this slide, where when we look at a thermal energy use of a 9.6, I mean, there's 2 bigger contributors to that. One is enthalpy wheels, and the second is a heat recovery chiller. and it has to work. If it doesn't work, then you don't get those numbers. So just out of curiosity, the hospitals here, how many of you either have heat recovery chillers in your building, just show of hand, or considering putting them into your building? So a lot of you are gonna deal with this heat recovery chillers, and it seems like there's a lot of lessons learned as well. So this is where we will connect, especially we have critical healthcare members who can connect back to each other, talk about it. So let's take this discussion to where some of the failure point comes in. And I think I'm going to bring in Ryan to your previous experience when you were with Sinai and in other cases as well. Like there's times when these contracts sometimes are not aligned to deliver these results, right? And the conversation then in becomes a bit harder. Like how were you able to manage some of these conversations around those contract piece, which didn't hinder sort of overall, but eventually there were some tough discussion that needs to be happen. And what would you sort of have hospitals do in those scenarios? Like how could they make these things possible where sometimes contract becomes an issue with these P3 projects?
Yeah, you know, West Park is my third P3 hospital, and you know, they're all, you know, there's different vintages of P3 contracts for DBFM, and you know, some of the challenges is just finding sort of that end goal where you both want to reach. Now, for the most part, there's always a financial incentive for both parties to get there, and you know, if you just have to start conversations casually or formally, however you wish, you know, and whether you have a good, you know, maintaining a good relationship is important with your service co, your project co. But even still, if your relationship is not where you'd like it to be, I think it's always still worth having these conversations to get here, because there's always going to be benefits, like I said, to both sides. And as I've gone through 3 very distinct different contracts for DBFM, which we know is the most complex type, there's always going to be a middle point where you'll reach to say, you know what, we may disagree in other areas of our relationship, whether it be day-to-day or you know, overall year-to-year, but at the same time, you're always going to find that you're aligned when it comes to financial savings and financial gains within your contract parameters. And so you'll be able to find a middle ground. Just continue to have those conversations and continue to look at the end goal as to where you'll both benefit.
Thanks, Ryan. And Glenn, you've seen both sides now. So maybe you can share your experiences from both sides. What do you saw, and then how did you approach, maybe starting with your role previously as being on the project co side when opportunities were brought to you, and sometimes obviously contract comes in its place, and then how did you manage that piece in your previous role, and then eventually now your new role, like how do you manage those aspects as well?
So I would largely echo Ryan's points with regard to having the conversations about these projects and looking for the opportunities for energy initiatives. And if you find yourself in a situation where you can't make a project square with the contract in terms of providing an adequate payback for the private sector parties and achieving a result for the healthcare authority, it's worth discussing how you can alter the contract to fit reality rather than trying to preserve the contract for the full 30 years without ever thinking outside the box. So in my private sector time, there were a number of projects that we were looking at where payback through gain share wasn't sufficient for the business case. You know, it's something that's a 15-year payback when you're only looking at getting half of those savings. Your payback is 30 years, which is the full term of the contract. So it's unlikely that you're going to get those projects through. But if you can have a conversation between the hospital and your project co or service co to look at modifying those payback mechanisms, a lot of times you can take those projects that were just beyond an acceptable payback for everyone and bring them back into, you know, an achievable envelope. And that really depends, like everything P3, on the relationship and being able to have those conversations. So that's where I would come from on this.
And again, now it's also an opportunity. If you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you as well. Yeah, Carolyn's back there, so she has a mic. Feel free to sort of raise a hand and join this conversation. So the reason why when we were studying these hospitals that are recently built, and there's many factors that are coming across. When you look at the full phase of these hospitals built, you have starting from the ministry, you have a policy that drives certain sort of specifications, and then the specification goes to construction, and the construction, you have energy targets that are set on these hospitals, then it goes to construction, and then it goes to operations, and then it goes to commissioning and all of that phase. And we have a lot of lessons learned through this, which is going to share. But some of the key things that also came about is there's hospitals that are not. It's not that we don't know what to do with it. It's just that sometimes they get stuck in the contract piece where the both parties could not agree to resolve that, and eventually the result is that hospital continued to underperform in many cases. But in other cases, construction is an issue. In other cases, we find operational is an issue. But I guess going back, Joe and Fabio, to you, the motivator in your scenario is obviously that you were initially trying to meet a target. Like that started this whole kind of conversations around which it seems obvious and odd as well that we're driving this because we're sort of contractually do that. But as an industry, this should be normal. Like we should be producing hospitals that are high performance and everybody has a full stake on it. But sometimes the motivation is different, right? So when you guys initially looked at it, like and you touched on a few of these, maybe you can elaborate on certain items around how did you manage the data piece to get this and looked at it, and those measures that came about it. What was the internal process within your team that sort of delivered, as you said, like 3 months of savings initially, right? So maybe you're going to touch base on that.
Yeah, so we're a DBFM, so we have a gain share mechanism. So, and we have a model that was developed during the pursuit. So if we consume more than that model, we pay the difference. If we're under that, we split the difference with the client. So we're financially incentivized and disincentivized from over-consuming energy. So, and from past experience, it's been clear to us that we need to get this right, and we need to get this right early. Otherwise, we will have to start paying potentially a considerable amount of money for being over our target. So that's why we had such a large team so early on established with the sole purpose to hit these targets. And that consisted of both contractors, consultants, and modelers to get this right. I forget the other question. What was it?
Yeah, I think you touched on that. I think Ryan, do you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, when I talk about relationships being important, Glenn and I are on this table right now, and Glenn is, at IO as my P3 asset manager person, but at the same time, Glenn, at some point, we were actually at an opposite ends of the table when Glenn was in private, and you were on the service co side of the relationship, and so when I talk about relationships are important, this is sort of a model of why that is, and for others here who are in a P3 DBFM who have an older vintage of contract, there's, as long as you come together and agree that you want to make that revision, you can, right? Glenn, we talked about that, where I had one contract where there's a five-year benchmark reset, and so sometimes the incentive to continue every 5 years to make drastic changes to energy improvements becomes a barrier, because that limbo bar keeps going so low that at some point you can't make it under there. And you don't want that to be the hurdle as to why you can't achieve better performance, better savings, better for the environment, and everything good for your hospital. And so there are ways through contract mechanisms where you can agree to say, you know what, we're going to do the best for both parties. Maybe we'll rewrite that section together and be able to get past that contract barrier in order to achieve the savings you want. So.
Yep, that's an excellent point, Ryan. Some of the earlier contracts had mechanisms that effectively disincentivized the private sector party from investing in the facility. That 5-year reset is a great example of that, because it makes even LED lighting retrofits almost cost prohibitive, just because that payback term is so limited. So if you're in a situation like that, please reach out to your IO asset manager. We're happy to discuss the ways that we've worked around that on facilities that we operate as well as with other hospitals. And that's definitely something that we can help with. So you don't need to go the rest of the contract without executing these projects. We can find ways to make them work.
Thanks. And any questions from audience? Okay, everybody's still absorbing this information. So, Fabio, going back to you on the technical side, two-part question, like the motivation for BPA. Obviously, you're part of the team that probably created, but when you guys looked at that data initially and you studied those analyses, and one of the things you touched on that around the ventilation system optimization, where you initially sort of looked at the damper positions and then tried to reset them, but that didn't give you the savings, right? So then you went back and changed the strategy. Can you maybe talk about it, how this became a sort of interactive process with the whole team, and then that eventually wasn't sort of a one-off solution that you tried and then it worked? So you have to go through. Can you maybe elaborate on that, what was done through this phase?
Yeah, I think right from the early phases, it was identified that the kind of pain share, gain share model was the whole team's interest. Wouldn't say it was their problem, but it was everyone needed to come to the table to kind of contribute to that. And we bought into that, and then all the partners that were involved there were also buying into it. So it was in our interest to offer our services and our expertise and kind of all work towards that same goal that Joe was talking about. So that kind of got us to buy in and put in that big effort in that kind of 1 year of almost like performance commissioning. And kind of keep turning over stones and finding gaps that could contribute to the team and contribute to hitting that target. So like the airside system, the first question, which we hear it here every year, do you have setbacks? And we looked to the project requirements and we said, we do have setbacks. Are they programmed in there? Yes, they are. And then we kind of just kept turning over stones and we ended up finding, well, it's there, but there's still a chance for improvement. So let's kind of exhaust that as far as we can go.
So that's a kind of a good observation. There's sometimes we stop at, as you said, like asking the questions around, do you have a setback? Yes, we have a setback. Are they programmed? Yes, they're programmed. And then the next question is actually critical when you touched on, I think, Joe, you touched on in that, is to go back and look at it, is it actually working? Because you could have a setback, but is that actually showing the graph that we showed here? Let me go back. Is it doing this kind of a profile where the VFDs are actually coming down as a result of the setback? Or is it just a setback that exists in the programming, but there is no results at the VFD or even at the meter? So that's the last question. If it's not answered or not looked at through the data, and that's where the opportunity got missed, because in theory, you could sort of check that box and say this set points are scheduled, but if you don't have a profile like this, you're not actually getting any savings because the system is not working. I think that's what you found initially, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the other very key aspect to all of this is that the data was available and it was reliable. So kind of early on, we also asked, is the data we're getting that we're going to start basing all this investigation process on or improvement process on, is it reliable? Is it accurate? And then we ruled that out. Yes, okay, but then let's move forward with that. And then we were able to implement changes, with an expected kind of result in mind, look at it and trust the data, and then did we achieve the gains that we expected? And then you can kind of process it from there. So the data was a huge part to the whole process as well.
Okay. Ian, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm deep interested in the conversation. It seems to be focused on DBFM. And I'm wondering, in the P3 contracts in the room, how many are DBF? Do we have any DBF contracts in the room?
1, 2, I think.
Yeah, I thought so. So how does all this apply in the world of DBF? Because it seems to be more of that coming. And how do we get these kind of, Joe, you could speak to this, Glenn, how do we get some of these outcomes with DBF contracts and How do we help some of those that have existing DBF contracts that may not be working well get to the happy space that you're describing here?
Just to add before you answer, I think what Ian is saying, if there's no motivation on the M side, how do you make sure you get the DBF working from day one?
DBFs have historically been a bit of a challenge, depending on the team that the building is being handed over to. There's often a skills gap there. And I know Eddie and I have talked about this in the past. There's often a skills gap there where you're taking people who've been operating older style plants that don't have, advanced elements like heat recovery and heat recovery chillers. And you're putting into a new world that they don't necessarily fully understand. So I would suggest that there's an opportunity for retraining there that would serve everyone well to take if they're going the DBF route. Without having the energy target and an energy model for the facility, it's much more difficult to ascertain whether your facility is performing as it should, which is where organizations like Greening Healthcare come in. They can give you an idea as to how your building is doing based on your metering system and their benchmarks. So you don't necessarily need to have an energy model, but if you can find in your budget to keep one for at least the first few years of operation, it probably pays back.
Glenn, that seems to put the onus on the facility operator, and we're seeing DBFs coming out there that didn't matter who the operator was, that plant is not going to run properly. It's the way it was commissioned and delivered. So I'm not sure it's training the staff. How do we get the outcomes we're looking for beyond just simply we need smarter operators? Because I think this is smart operators that they're doing the best they can. And they do have energy models, by the way, and who's going to help them interpret the models and figure out where these things should be?
I would hold that up as one of the benefits of the DBFM contract. When you're bringing the private sector to bear on that problem, they have that experience and would have an easier time solving some of those challenges. I don't have a great answer in the moment for you on the DBFs. It's really not my particular field of expertise.
I'm just going to bring Joe. I think the piece around what Ian is touching here is that the last piece, it goes back to the construction as well. There's a lot more, I noticed due diligence goes in if it's a DBFM, where every single element of the construction is being twice checked to make sure the energy target is met. Whereas in DBFM, it might not be their case of due diligence, because in the end, it's more of a passing on the baton to operations, and then hopefully it works, right? But Joe, the work you guys do on the M side, how much of that work is a transferable knowledge that we can sort of pass on in a package in a way that it's useful to operations teams to replicate it? Because let's assume for now the construction is fine, but it's mainly in the operations. Is there a method to package this because eventually the DBF is the team's going to go away, and then they're going to give the hospital to the operations team?
It's difficult for me to answer this because, again, I'm mostly, most of my experience with DBFMs. But I guess it's also important to note that energy management doesn't start at substantial completion. It starts almost at design. So it's important to, again, it's difficult to, give direct recommendations on exactly how to get this done, but early on in the design, it's important to read those sequences, ensure they're aligned with the design intent, and that the shop drawings are also consistent, and those are also consistent with the design intent. Because if those aren't aligned, it'll be really difficult to make those changes once the building is built. So getting those done early on is important. DBFMs obviously have that kind of both carrot and stick for us to do that work, or excuse me, for the private partner to do that work. But even still, once the building reaches substantial completion, it's important to don't just assume everything's going to work the way it should. I think Fabio mentioned, we'll call it seasonal performance commissioning. That is that's necessary. There's no other way around it. Commissioning will only get you so far. You need to understand how the system actually operates based on actual loads, based on actual outdoor weather conditions. So doing that seasonal commissioning or performance commissioning is it is a necessity. So whether that's taken on internally or you work closely with your design partners or excuse me, design build partners, it's something that needs to get done.
Yeah, if I sort of paraphrase, what I'm hearing is that there's checks and balances needs to be in place for every stage of the project. Like you mentioned starting, I think the starting point of all of this conversation is to have the right target for your building. And if your target is not correct, like everybody is trying to achieve that, and if the starting point or the starting goal is not set correctly, then obviously the outcome is not expected to be that. And then I think, as Joe mentioned, from your experiences from the DBFM project, the key aspect is their operations team has been involved, building owners or the hospitals. So ensuring that you have a team that is actually looking at every aspect of that project, not just solely relying on the project co and making sure that you're getting to check with every aspect to get this delivered outcome, then it's easy to kind of make the final tweaks and changes, which is what the operations teams were able to do with the DBFM. But if the opportunity get missed when the capital is getting spent, it's going to be really hard to fix those issues afterward because the capital is already spent. We have a few minutes to take any audience questions. If anybody has any questions. Go ahead, Matt. Carolyn's going to bring them.
The experience you described in that first year, it sounded like it was done during after you're occupied. Do you feel that that was necessary in order to see the building as it was intended to function? In that, do you think that the same success could have been done in a pre-turnover standpoint where that building was more or less empty? Or do you really need the people in that building and that load profile to affect those optimization changes?
Yeah, I guess you're suggesting like if there's a point in time when it's post-substantial but pre-occupied, you definitely can. You just may have to be mindful that things may change later on. So like when you're given the building, commissioning is done, you're ensured the sequences adhere to whatever was intended to do, and then oftentimes once you do that performance commissioning, there's tweaks that need to be made to make sure that it not only works correctly, but it's following what you want it to do, following the design intent. And sometimes when you add different loads, that may change the staging of certain equipment, and then you may need to relook at that. From my experience, the biggest factors are really outdoor environment. Like that's the biggest factor that you need to be mindful of, but internal heat can also impact that as well. But I don't think you need to necessarily wait till that point.
Yeah, I think Joey touched on performance commissioning. If you look at your current specification, I don't think majority of the specification carry that word anywhere. So, and typically it's a functional commissioning that gets done on these systems, not a performance commissioning. And the results that you see for that transition from a functional to performance commissioning is where you get these outcomes, because the performance commissioning then tracks what your fan should be doing, what your chiller should be doing, versus whether it's coming on and off. So that's typically doesn't belong in any specification at this point, but that is one of the key contributors to high performance hospital, is that there was an aspect of performance verification done on all of these systems to make sure they're running as intended versus running as an on-off. We have probably time for one more question.
I'm just curious, between the DBF and DBFM, it sounded a lot like the only reason you're actually trying to get to that high performance, low energy utilization is because there was a financial incentive to actually reduce your energy costs, and therefore, that's the incentive to make changes. Can you talk a little bit to the strategic direction from the beginning to actually have made the site a high performance site with a lower energy utilization, which would have been driven to? Because it kind of sounds like you set the energy bar higher and now using that financial incentive to bring it down.
So I think it's fair to say that it's the same motivations exist regardless of the model, like whether it's DBF or DBFM. We want to make these facilities as efficient as possible, and we want to keep the utility bills as low as possible. The DBFM mechanism probably keeps more of a focus on that for all of the parties from the initiation of the contract through into operations, because there's that financial motive assigned to it. We're probably all doing the same things. The private sector is just likely more active about it because they're at risk on the energy front.
But if you had a low target to begin with, the incentive is really just to maintain that, not to improve it.
Provided the energy efficiency projects are out there and viable, the private sector also has the motivation, again, to make money at these things and by implementing projects. Public sector, again, same motivation, probably less discussion about it, if only because there's not that financial motive.
Yeah, I think you touched on a great point, which is set your targets correct, like based on empirical data, use that and set the targets, because that's one of the motivators to start everything, and then everything falls in place. Yes, I mean, sometimes it's sticks that works, sometimes it's carrots, but all of these, it's a combination of everything. So, but setting the target is a critical piece in the overall conversation, the vision setting from a hospital and where they want to be, and then having the right partner to deliver that eventually leads it. Okay, that's all the time. Thank you, panelists, for this. This is amazing. So we have one more things to do, which is Ian's favorite. So we're going to do a award presentation for next 15 minutes, so before lunch. And Ian's going to take over after this. Thank you, the panelists, and thank you, everyone.
Awards time. So after an intense morning, we get to celebrate a little bit. So here's my good friend Michael with bringing the awards up. So we talked earlier today about we need heroes, and heroes are those that go above and beyond, do more than they've been asked to do to get to the end goal we all need to be at. So the hospitals we're about to recognize, as I mentioned, they're my heroes. So without further ado, let's get on with it. The process will be that we'll present the awards, and you will cheer and applaud appropriately, and then you get to break for lunch, and they don't get fed. We take them out and take a picture of them so I can be happy this time next year. So let's get started with, there's a picture each time, that's right. Are you ready for that? Okay, so want to begin with William Osler. I know you're here. Eddie? So the Peel Memorial Hospital, our lowest carbon hospital to begin with, and the best have a way of getting better. It's remarkable how that works. CAMH. The Queen site, you know that massive redevelopment down there. It really is a world-class effort how it's all coming together, but the Queen site overall, 6.4% energy savings. And from the north, Health Sciences North, Sudbury Outpatient Centre. And the biggest contingent in the room, sick kids. The remarkable Patient Support Center, which I think we'll hear some more about this afternoon. 15.8% energy reduction. And we have a double winner here. Bright Shores, one of our newer members, our appreciated keynote speaker, Ann Ford, as the CEO last year, but Bright Shores both for Wyerton and for Meaford, 6.3% at Wyerton and 5% at Meaford. Congratulations. And our friends from New York, Michael. One of our newest members with the Huntington Hospital at 17.4% savings and the Mather Hospital at 21.1%. Great work. Have you got enough hands there to hold this? You can do this. Just need more hands. So I say no good works go unpunished. So all the award winners, could you gather in the far right corner, and then we'll head out to a photo spot. Everybody else gets lunch. We'll see you at 1 o'clock.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Harry Van Meer with Alberta, now Health Shared Services. And so our department I take care of, we are responsible for utilities, energy management, and sustainability for not just our organization, but our former organizations. We used to be all one, called Alberta Health Services, Alberta Health Services, and we very recently split into 6 different organizations. And so we are part of mostly corporate. And so we manage utilities. We got about $135 million utility spend. We have over 1,800 utility meters. We manage 372 buildings, and we are deregulated in Alberta, so we also do contracts for differences to manage the utility costs. So we have 830 CFD meters, or virtual meters.
Thanks, Harry. These are the results that continue to sort of give the saves, as you could see. So you started a project back in, I believe, during the COVID period, and implemented recommissioning measures across all these sites. And as you can see, each bar is 1 year for each site. And then the savings percentage is listed. Some of the sites, for example, Q2, 41% savings. And then Medicine Hat is another big city acute care hospital that's 22% and continue to increase as well. So can you maybe elaborate a bit on like your initial start off with a project? How do you guys approach these buildings initially? And then what was kind of the work that was just went through these buildings at a high level? And then, let's stick with that, and then I'll have follow-up questions.
Okay, so we actually started the program pre-COVID. Back then we had a grant from the government, so we engaged a consultant to look at some of the buildings. We provided them access to all of the utility information. We've got a web-based utility database we use called EnergyCap. And so we got years of historical data. It's not live data, it's always from the utility invoices. And so we just selected a random selection of buildings, some larger buildings and some smaller buildings. We're against for provincial, so we tried to get some diversity in where in the province we were selecting these buildings. And that became the first go around how we started this. Then COVID happened, and then we did a bit of a change of strategy because we could not get consultants to go to site. So there we focused on buildings that we had a fully digital BMS system that was not at end of life. We could get remote access. So there we created meetings between the commissioning consultant or energy efficiency consultant, our facilities folks, and the BMS vendor, because we knew a lot of that would really be about optimizing the building management system. And so because we could not physically enter the buildings with our consultants, we did everything that we could do remote.
Can you touch on some of the measures that you guys did? I think you had a pre-work on air testing, and also you did a lot of work on developing the zoning maps, internal team, and then also, I mean, the lighting was a big piece as well. And then VFDs, can you touch on all of those?
Yeah, so a number of years earlier, we had another grant from the government, so we were allowed to engage a consultant. So we kind of did a survey of all of our buildings. Again, we had the consultant physically go to a number of sites back then as a bit of a semi-random sampling. The survey involved, what kind of light you have, what's your boiler system like, how old are things, how old is your BMS, how much is digital, and how much is still pneumatic, to try to kind of get an idea on what we had there in place for an asset base. And that one actually determined some of these sites that are shown on this graph.
Thanks,
Oh, and sorry, though I didn't answer the other question. So the other thing we did for the consultant was we engaged a balancing contractor, and we had the balancing contractor go to site, and they basically tested for things as they really were. So we had them go through every air system, and they would do the pressure drops against all the components in the air handling unit. They would take note of, and it was mostly about recommissioning, but we're also looking for some capital projects. So they would note, on the pumps, where our balancing valves for our constant volume systems were at what state, how close were they to meet those requirements? How far were we from design to reality, where we had existing information? And then the second thing we did was we created based on an architectural floor plan, just like 8.5 by 11, so very high level. We worked with our facilities folks, and we overlaid the areas that the air handling units covered against the occupancy. So we could and we put in some of the information on the air handling units, like the horsepower, the volumes where we had them, the total exhaust, the total supply. And then on the occupancy side, we would figure out which areas of the building was that occupancy and what were the hours. So we were trying to see where at a very quick glance, we could tell where there was opportunities. For example, where we had building or air systems that were running 24/7, but the occupancy was not 24/7, or other areas where the air system was covering a space that was 24/7, but also a space that wasn't 24/7. So was there not an opportunity to do something there, either physical or through programming?
Thanks, Harry. And the story kind of continued for gas as well. As you could see, majority of the sites did show up those consistent savings after the measures were implemented year over year. Electricity in some cases is easier to be done, especially if there's a lighting project, because once the lighting is done, you expect the savings, but the gas is hard to manage and maintain over the years because you got to have a consistent process to apply. And I think we touched on this, Harry, during the prep call, is one of the things that it's an observation is coming that with operations team is that if you give, maybe you can elaborate on that, but my understanding is if you give something to an operations team, most of the times they will keep it running that way. So if you give them an optimized building, they'll keep them as an optimized. But if you give them a building that's 24/7, they will keep 24/7 most of the times, unless obviously there's process changes and everything comes in. But as you could see, there is some setbacks as well, but I think you can touch base on that. Some of these are observational, which you could see that in some years there were setback. I remember some of these conversations go back, but then they were fixed, and then eventually savings went up as well, right? So, but there's a lot of consistency in gas savings that you could see years over year. So Harry, your experience around sort of sustaining these savings, right? What is there anything you can add on because how you guys did the projects is as a sort of a central body that provided resources to your local teams within that, and then they eventually sort of kept it running as it is in most cases, right?
Yeah, part of that is turnover, and one thing our facility staff are really good at is meeting our clients' expectations. So if something is too hot or too cold, they will respond. Their response is not always the most energy efficient response, and sometimes that response, even if it's for a project, and you go into a mechanical room and you look at one of the things I like to do is look at the MCC panel to see what is on hand. Because, and you find things that are in hand, and then you start to ask questions, why is this pump or this air system on hand? And sometimes they know, but often they'll say, it was like that when I got there, and I've been here for 10 years, right? Nobody knows why. So And it's really about asking those questions.
Thanks, Harry. I'll come back to you. So Miles, I'm going to pass on this sticker to you so you can kind of run it with the slide deck. So why don't you tell us your story to date on what Shared Health Manitoba is currently doing?
Okay, thank you very much. This is kind of interesting. I gave him about 30 slides, and I know they're not all in there, so this will be a surprise to me what I see.
We like surprises.
This is fun. Yeah, so my name is Miles Booster. I'm the Director of Environmental Sustainability and Energy for Shared Health, and it sounds like a very similar role to what Harry has. So I'm getting a master class lesson from Harry as we've been talking at this conference. We're a little bit further behind, and this is a picture of our newly minted provincial energy tracking system. We've been working on this for about a year now. One of the things that happened in Manitoba a while ago is we were mandated to report on energy and emissions. And we used that as an opportunity to request funding to develop a utility tracking system. And so what you're seeing here is the total energy used per facility by region. So each of the different colors is the different regions. There's about 5 of them. I guess there's 6 there, including Shared Health. And the size of the squares are proportionate to the amount of energy that they use. So from this, you can see that the 2 shades of blue make up about 2/3 of our province. That's basically Winnipeg. And then the rest you can see is around Winnipeg. Now we've also started to develop very similar to the database that Greening Healthcare has. We're now able to do that for all of our facilities. The challenge with it is this data comes from our utility, and then some of it we manually enter because we don't get everything digitally from Manitoba Hydro. But a lot of the area information and the site information that you need to be able to do proper benchmarking is taking time to develop. I mean, things like square footages and, you go into a hospital that's got a personal care home attached to it, but it's on 1 meter. We got to work through all those things to get reasonable metrics. These are the facilities that we've been able to sort of verify, and we're starting to go through that. In total, we have about 250 buildings, 70 of which are hospitals. What this has done for us is given us the ability to lay out very practical strategies. And so this is an example of what we're looking at right now. So on the thermal system optimization side, we've been launching a steam trap audit and repair program throughout the Winnipeg region, and that has given us some very good early wins. We're also looking at enthalpy wheel tune-ups. So working with Greening Healthcare, they have a great checklist. So we're using that as a basis to walk in and say, wherever we have one of these things, let's make sure it's working right. Targeted fuel switching. Interestingly, it's very difficult to do a lot of decarbonization when natural gas prices are so low. But we have a lot of facilities in the north that are running 100% on propane or fuel oil. And the cost of propane is much higher. So it's much higher than even electricity. So we've been looking at electrification with cost savings, even with paybacks lower than 10 years. So to be able to decarbonize a facility with a 10-year payback is not bad. And then looking for incentive programs to try to help make that even better. Other performance improvements we're making, we're looking at a focused recommissioning program. We've started with Concordia Hospital. That's sort of the first pickle out of the pickle jar. We wanted to make sure that we got all the things right, and we're sure glad we did that as a pilot because we found a number of barriers that we had to work through. Now we're launching into doing 3 more facilities. We have Selkirk Energy Optimization Project. And then on electricity efficiency side, electricity in Manitoba is pretty well carbon-free. It's all hydroelectricity. So there's not a huge decarbonization component to that, except that we have significant energy savings, which helps us to then fund other decarbonization projects. So we're looking at HSC and getting into some real-time metering there to try to sort through better operations. Okay, so this provincial utility tracking system has also enabled us to do site-level dashboards. So we use that information, we put it into a dashboard that's useful for facility staff, and we have regular conversations with these hospitals to talk about how they're doing. We show them their data, make sure they're aware, this is how much your hospital's using. Here's what the potential would be if you could achieve the greening healthcare targets, and what's the plan? And then we start to talk about strategies with them. Most places that I walk into, the staff really do know where a lot of the energy savings are, and they have a lot of equipment to be able to make that happen. But it's a matter of what are your barriers, and then we can talk about those and work through them. So this is an example. We've gone through the largest 9 hospitals here, and we've started to identify, what's going well and what's not going well, what are the potentials, and what are those targets. So now that we've got this tracking system in place, we can actually say that every hospital in Manitoba or every healthcare facility has a target, and we are monitoring it. So that's a huge step for us. And it gives us the ability to do this, where we can take a look at, here's where the potential energy savings are for those 9 hospitals, and here's how much we could save. So for 9 hospitals to identify almost $3 million a year of savings, that's not bad. That's a big start. And then, of course, it goes back to, well, what are we going to do? Well, it's the same stuff we've been talking about at this conference, right? AHU scheduling, seasonal operations, get rid of that heating and cooling at the same time, heat recovery, outdoor air, chiller plant optimization, boiler plant, and then, of course, lighting. So.
No, you're good. Thanks, Mile. This is a great overview, and you touched on that. This is the journey you guys starting, but you're starting with the data that you already possess, and then now you have a targets that helps you pinpoint where to focus on. Alan, I'm going to go back to you with. You touched on you're trying to apply this approach for the PSE to other buildings in your. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what's your plan to sort of scale this at sick kids, and what are you looking at doing right now?
As sick kids, we have learned recommissioning becomes successful when we stop treating recommissioning as a sad activity, but treat this as a system in itself. And I want to give credit to my colleague Trevor, who is a facility operation manager, but has 20 years PM project management background. And the first thing we change is organizational. We run recommissioning as a capital project. That means that we start from clean project charter and the securing senior management endorsement, and aligning clinical directors as earlier, and then we apply structured project management into the process, including defense scope, allocating resource, funding, identifying the critical path, tracking risks, and creating schedule, kind of thing. And I think what this make recommissioning easier is it make recommissioning more visible and accountable. And we also customize the PM project management to have energy performance KPI embedded into the process. And one example is that traditional project management already tracking schedule, tracking deliverable, and we add energy performance into it. And the example is like we monitor the amount of reheat energy being supplied from low carbon resource. And with this, it helps us make decisions not just based on are we done, but also based on are we performing well. And so at the end, energy performance, energy KPI, not just as a check mark, but as a part of the PM itself. And also, we're also focusing on execution efficiency, and recommissioning involves a lot of repetitive tasks. And so we create some in-house tools that tailor to our facility. And one example is like we create actually 36 evaluation tools that can take yeah, so this is the actually 36 evaluation tool that can take the trend logs and evaluate air handling unit performance hour by hour, frame by frame, and then generate analysis and AI-driven insights. So this provide more efficient communication and collaboration with engineers and contractors. And so with this type of activity, it scale our work, but not scaling the effort. I think looking forward, we believe knowledge is going to be the next frontier. And now we are working with CK's AI to build a facility operation knowledge base that include sequence operation, equipment data, and what we learned from projects, from operation in the past, and include everything into a searchable, structured system. So the ultimate goal is like in the future, retrieving operation knowledge is just like the way how we use ChatGPT. You type the question and the system found out and connect and summarize what we have done, what we have learned in the past. So that's what we are doing and what we are going to do in the future. I guess in a way, we are not recommissioning just the building, we are also recommissioning the way how we do commissioning.
That's a great point. It's always a process that leads to outcomes in most cases. Talking about the process, Harry and Miles, I think this applies to you guys. Your setup is in a way that you go sort of initially and as an outsider to your directors and operations teams on site to talk about, look, we're going to do this recommissioning project. How do you get a buy-in from them? Because I mean, that structure is very similar in both provinces, whereas in Ontario, it's individual hospitals. But yours is probably much, I think, is more harder because they don't pay utility bills, you pay them. So for them, it's easy to say, yeah, okay, we listen, but we're not going to do anything. You guys figure it out. And you're like, how are you able to get buy-in from the facility teams to do this work?
Well, I guess it'd be a combination of a carrot and a stick. So yeah, for us, utilities are centralized. So the utilities budget does not show up in the facilities manager's budget line. They will often, because they know that I take care of energy management, they will approach me if they see a problem and they don't have no other funding source. And it's usually more for capital type thing like lighting. I don't think anybody has ever approached me about wanting to do recommissioning. It's more the stuff, right? And that's fine. You know, their role is to maintain that facility. So they're not really concerned about recommissioning. Again, as you mentioned, they don't pay the utility bills. And so because we got 1,200 facility folks across our province, not everyone is going to be in tune with wanting to do what we're doing. They're too busy or whatever. So we really try to focus on the champions, the people that approach us. We get a lot of people approaching us. And on the stick side, my boss oversees everybody, including our, not just the facilities folks, but our project management folks and clinical engineers and everything. So I can use a stick approach if I have to, but the stick approach at the end of the day is not very successful. If someone doesn't want to do something, even if they're, my boss is 4 levels above them, it's not going to happen. So yeah, just really focusing on, and also, the other thing we do is, when we do projects, not so much for recommissioning, but for other projects, we create a one-page infographic of what we expect the savings to be, what we expect it to cost, and the emission reduction, and kind of a little description of what we're doing. And then after the project, we do the final version. I'm blessed to have a permanent measurement and verification engineer on my team, so we measure everything. We sell our carbon offsets too, so that comes with a lot of requirements. So we're pretty comfortable with the savings, at least where we can meter. Like lighting is easy, where we got 347-volt panels. As you mentioned before, the boilers are a little bit tough, so sometimes we have to rely on the utility meter data, and that takes a longer period of time. And we report quarterly on the savings. So far we've been able to reduce over $40 million of utility costs over the last 12 years. And probably more of a younger person thing, I would say the younger people are a little more in tune with the wanting to do environmental stuff, and maybe the older folks like me aren't quite so much in tune and need a little bit more convincing. But we focus on our champions. When we have a good news story, there's a newsletter that comes out. We focus on those champions and what they've done, and that will often have other people coming forward to us. And we really try to say, as far as the recommissioning goes, maybe they're not so concerned about the utility reduction, but the recommissioning process also involves things they are interested in. Like it deals with, why do you have hot, cold complaints in this area? Or why are they complaining about ventilation or whatever, right? That's the majority of the calls are hot, cold, perceived idea there's not enough cooling in the space from our clients. So when we go to site, we look at the things that are interesting to us, but we also make sure they're involved in the process and they can give us their wish list. If you ask the right questions, sometimes they might not on their own connect what their issue is with how we can help them, but we try to have enough dialogue that we can find out what their issues are. And can we solve all their issues? Obviously not, but usually we can solve a good number of them.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I like what you said there towards the end. I think if I went into a healthcare facility that I knew was not performing well from an energy perspective, I'm very likely going to be bumping into some pretty unhappy FM staff because they're dealing with a lot of issues. I've looked at thousands of buildings in terms of energy use, and I can tell there is a high correlation between energy use and poor performance. If you get energy right, if it looks good, quite often it's performing well. It's amazing how that works. So I would say that helps with engagement tremendously. If I'm focusing on what is your problem, if I'm asking questions about how is this going, it sounds like you're using a lot of outside air. Yes. You walk into the mechanical rooms, you see things are in hand. There's a story behind that. So there's some degree of listening. The other thing is the engagement piece. We tend to focus, because we have so many facilities that we're looking at, we tend to focus on those that are engaged in this. And the ones that aren't just kind of slip down the list a little bit. So those ones end up getting more resources to help start solving problems. And it's just because they're more attentive. And that seems to help as well.
Good.
Just the other thing I want to add is we do have movement of staff across our buildings, and sometimes our champions will move to another location and they will take that interest they have because they've seen success where they come from and bring it into the place they are going. Unfortunately, the reverse is also true. Where that champion leaves, if they're replaced by a non-champion, then sometimes we can see things reverting, or maybe they need a little bit of education about why the numbers are going this way at one time, and they come on board and they're going the wrong way.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a great point around champions, and we're seeing that story. The challenge is like we have limited champions, right? We got to make sure there's a lot of followers to replicate that as well. I think that's where your infographics comes in and excites people about what you've done in other building, and then it excites other people as well. Harry, going back to you, one of the challenges that you got you had a great success story, as you could see, there's tons of savings to be had in these buildings, but then you got to hit with some roadblock around financial challenges. Like, how are you now trying to still do this work, but trying to overcover that through other means of procurements?
Oh, I was hoping to learn that here. So yeah, that is a challenge. So and again, our funds are going down, but we also have a challenge that so the utilities, even though the managers aren't responsible for it, my boss is responsible for the overall budget, and we're divided into 5 zones. So those zone directors are responsible for their budgets. That all filters down, right? And I think among our senior leadership, there's enough knowledge that when we save $10 on utilities, that's $10 that goes into someplace else, right? And so they're becoming a little more, again, they are kind of focused on their area, but there is the push, at least at the senior leadership level, that saving on utilities kind of makes sense because it's helping. And in Alberta, we're deregulated, so our utility costs fluctuate substantially. We do CFDs, as I mentioned, so we have some ways of controlling that, but we're really, we don't control the market. We're part of the market, and right now we have a surplus, so prices are low. In a couple of years, it's going to be the opposite way. So I try to educate our senior leadership, saying, yes, we're in a period now where we've got a surplus, but that's not going to last. So we need to do things now that are going to help us 2, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road.
Thanks, sir. Miles, you guys, when you started this process with one of your sites, there were some roadblocks. You want to talk about this and how you guys want to moving forward? Like, what are some of the lessons learned through that initial implementation or investigation, and how you want to use that opportunity to scale it further?
Yeah. So the Concordia, we started with a recommissioning. We hired a consultant, and we went through, we tried to detail the work out as much as we could to try to get, all the things covered that we wanted to get covered. But we found that the supply chain was the next sort of barrier. So we got through the funding barrier, we got some funding, we got through the capacity barrier by bringing in a consultant, we got the dedicated staff to help us through this. We had buy-in, but we didn't have supply chain at the table. And then what we found was the consultant was going out there looking for, developing the scopes of work and getting the quotations for us to evaluate, but they weren't aware of all the other contract environment that they were going to be faced with through our supply chain. And so now what we've done is we've looked at that, because of that first pilot, we've kind of jigged the whole roadmap for recommissioning. And now we're having a kickoff meeting at the beginning. So we'll have a very clear checklist of what's in scope. And then we will have supply chain at the table to talk with it. So that we can give that checklist to supply chain, and they can say, here's the kind of bells and whistles we're going to be looking at. What do we need to be aware of? What do we have already as a provincial contract? And what do we have to, what hoops do we have to jump through? So I expect that's really going to help. That was one of the largest barriers that we had. It's what delayed us at least 6 months on that first.
Thanks, Miles. I'm also going to open for any questions from the audience. Please feel free to jump in at this point if you have any questions. So, Alan, going back to you, one of the interesting things we had in a prep, and this is maybe we don't have answers, but we want to put it out there for Enbridge and ISO and hopefully other parties to hear about. So a lot of the work that you guys did was all internal. And it was even, I would say, slightly harder to kind of make the business case with no incentives because as the current programs are structured. Maybe can you walk us through your team work on how you guys kind of manage that, and then why some of this work wasn't applicable for incentive piece?
For the PAC recommissioning project, we did not approach to IESO and Enbridge for explore incentive opportunity. I think the reason is that we start from a low T. but we're not 100% sure what percentage saving we are to get. And I think another barrier I would say is that we are doing this, doing the recommissioning using our in-house resource. And we did not hire a third-party consultant. So that's what the current program not designed for. I would say using internal resources, external resources are all have value. And our case really, we know what problems we have, and we want to do a surgical type of upgrade replacement. We focus on one area, we want to jump in and bring the team that already know our building, know our operation. And if we hire a third party, we're gonna spend upfront cost, spending time with them, get them familiarized with our building. But I think using external consultant is especially useful for if you are dealing with a large scale project and need to complete in a short period of time. They got dedicated resource and they got special expertise. And that's the thing. I think if in the future we are running a similar project, a large scale, we're definitely going to consider third-party external consulting resource, commission agent, and try to secure incentive to help us make the business case more stronger. And having said that, we CKs we attend a conference webinar scheduled by Green Healthcare and IESO Civil Energy Program. We learn a lot from this, and I'm happy that we this time had this opportunity as a reward to whatever we achieved, we received before.
You guys totally deserve it, and I think that's the leaders we talk about in this space needed to sort of create this value proposition for everybody else to try and replicate it. Going back to the audience, questions. We have two questions, so I'm going to take the back first.
Just a quick one. A lot of publications out there talk to the potential of saving approximately 15 to 25% from the effort of recommissioning. Based on your experience, would you rate that to be too aggressive, too conservative, or pretty realistic?
Let's go ahead.
I always say it's a little bit on the aggressive side, at least for our experience. But I also have to say it's really building dependent. You know, we'll do the same program in a number of different buildings, and we get different results, right? You know, they have the 5 and 10% club. We've been part of both of those, and so 10% is certainly not unreasonable in most cases. And I would say the potential is probably higher in the newer buildings, or at least buildings with a newer BMS system, where you've got all the bells and whistles. Like the infrastructure is there, it's just not optimized. And in our larger buildings, we tend to have, for HVAC techs, we tend to pull people from industry. I'm not sure what it's like here, but we don't have like an apprenticeship program. We get journeymen. So they know how to program, but in their former world, often they were not involved in making buildings more energy efficient. They know how to program. And often, even from construction, once set points are in place, it's like set it and forget it, right? And I'd say in those cases too, there's lots of potential, but it takes time. It means raising, you know, a temperature up or down, depending on the system, or changing the static pressure a little bit, you know, any complaints, any concerns, and you kind of keep pushing it, right? So, but that takes time, and that takes time for someone in facilities, and also time for someone to kind of manage that process.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, what I typically do for, if you're using that number in a business case, I try to estimate low and deliver high savings. So we're trying to be conservative as we can, and then when we show success, we're trying to exceed those numbers. And based on our preliminary one that's coming out of the gate, we're doing much better than I anticipated. So. Well, so far we're at 9% on electricity. We're searching for more on the gas side. But that being said, I mean, I'm just literally doing the POs on 4 other measures, which should take us beyond 10%. So, but we didn't estimate there when we justified it.
I would also say a good place to start is to find out what the schedules are of that equipment, because the easiest way to save something is to turn it off, right? So, and that's the savings. It costs nothing. But what I find for us, it pays for some of those other things that take a little bit of capital. And to see, and the other thing I like to do is, I don't visit sites so much anymore, but there's nothing that gives you more information than a BMS graphic of the boiler plant or the chilled water plant. And that is a point in time. But you kind of keep track of some of those things. You know, what is it like in peak heating and peak cooling and those swing months? The swing months, all those opportunities. Because I often will go and you find the temperature differentials between the temperature differential for both the heating and cooling system. Often when you go there is nowhere near that. It's always substantially less, right? Like just sometimes often a couple degrees. So boiler plants tend to be very oversized. And just kind of seeing like, you know, at this ambient temperature, what's happening with my control valves in the air handling units. So probably in a day or two, you can see what your potential is.
I'm just curious what type of sub-metering, if any, you guys are using in these recommissioning projects for any specific pieces of equipment or your boiler or chiller plants, or if you're mostly relying on just like the building service meters to sort of evaluate your energy improvements.
I can start. Yeah, I've had this question already today a few times. Manitoba has very low energy rates. So the justification to put in metering is very difficult to do. So we don't tend to put in a lot of extra metering, but what we do is we monitor the overall recommissioning at the utility meter. And so we're monitoring that carefully. But the thing is all the measures that we do, we're trying to maximize our local incentives. So we have Efficiency Manitoba. If you've ever been involved in a DSM program, you know that there are very rigid requirements around measurement and verification. So if we do get the incentive, we know we're getting those savings. Then what we do is we look for it, we look for the curve bending in the data that we're getting billed on. And if a site has a good billing automation system, we will definitely use that. But I don't necessarily rely on that. Quite often, you know, if you do a lighting retrofit, it's pretty clear you're going to get those savings. It's a little more, you might need a little bit of metering if you're doing more occupancy-based type things, but if you're changing a bulb out, you kind of know that you're going to get significant savings. And if it's a large enough facility, you will see that on your utility bills. So you can start looking for that right away. So it really is measure dependent. So every application for funding that comes into my office, I need to see a measurement and verification plan. And I have been accepting the Efficiency Manitoba requirements as part of that. So.
And yeah, some of the things we do. So we have a whole bunch of data loggers. So where we can, we put data loggers on them. So for example, we do lighting projects. I think I mentioned this earlier. 347 volt, it's easy. We'll put the data loggers on, measure 2 weeks pre and 2 weeks post, 15-minute readings. When we do anything where we think we're going to add a VFD where there's a constant volume pump, then it's just, you know, we just need some quick readings, 1 minute over 5 minutes, because it's constant. And then often we do not rely on, we will bring in a balancing contract where we had to find out what our actual flows are. I don't necessarily trust if we can find a balancing report, it's usually outdated. Things like when we're doing plumbing retrofits, then we're kind of stuck. We have to use the utility meter data, but then we'll use a longer period of time to figure out what that baseline is. And we use trends within the BMS system where we have that capacity. Sometimes we find with the BMS trending, we need to be very diligent about working with the sites, because if we're not diligent enough and it's something we want to track over a longer period of time, and if they're adding trends, then we'll lose the bottom end because it just kind of keeps doing the new one. So it's and in some cases we've upgraded the server just so we can get those extra trends.
I just had one thing to add, because as you were speaking, you triggered. So in the past, I used to work for the DSM Power Smart program when Manitoba Hydro had that program. It became Efficiency Manitoba in later years. We used to do very detailed metering, and the efficiency program often requires detailed monitoring. But the trouble with that sometimes is if you're not aware of the interactive effects, you may not capture that, but you will see that at the utility meter. So if you do a massive lighting retrofit, well, all that lighting is ending up as heat in your building, well, large portion of it. And you're bringing your electrical costs down, but then you're seeing a bump up on your natural gas. So you'll see that at the utility bills. You won't necessarily see that if you're just monitoring the electrical consumption at the panel. But maybe you're accounting for that.
I love it.
You flagged me on something else, just one more thing. So the other thing is we find, like, we don't put in the sub-meter system, but because of the lead requirements, our new builds often will have a very complex system. And when that's involved, or when that's installed, we will go back after 6 months to try to work with them on the data. And 100% of the time, we find nobody looks at it. There's tons of information there, but there is a different focus for them. Sometimes we find that the software that was installed comes with a service contract, and nobody wants to pay for the service contract. So all the physical stuff is sitting there. We just need someone to pay the $2,000 or something.
Yeah, and if you're considering metering, meter is a good starting point. And now with these days, we could have internal meter both on electricity and gas as well. And that's one thing. We will consider, or we recommend you go check if on your facilities, if you don't have gas meter as an intro meter, you can talk to Julian and his team. There's an opportunity to update that meter. That's your starting point to kind of track all your consumption. And with the recommissioning project, it's expected that you're going to be above the 5% threshold anyway, so it's not going to lose in the sort of the noise piece. So that's if you don't have any meters, don't stall your project because you don't have a sub-metering. So you start with that and you should start the savings. And even with the strategic metering, like there's a way to sort of categorize this, all the meetings, as Harry pointed out. Oftentimes we put too many meetings when we start a project, and then they don't end up getting used. So the key thing is we need metering, but it has to be strategic around what you're actually going to measure. We may have a couple more questions time. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, all right. I think, do you have a question?
Last break for the day. So if I could suggest use it wisely, there's people in the room you probably haven't met yet that you need to. Mike Lithgow and Mike Gentili, you two, both in blue. You got the two most complicated hospitals in the world. Congratulations. So lots to share about how do you deal with aging infrastructure and that work. But if you haven't spoken to the Enbridge folks and what they're offering now, you need to if you're in Ontario. So whatever connections you need to make in this last break. Know you're all busy, but do come back for the last session. We got two more things we need to deal with. One is organizationally. How do you manage change? So everything we talked about is about change. We've got to change what we're doing now, otherwise we can't get to a different place than we would otherwise get to. How do you manage that in hospitals? We've got a great panel to talk about that. If you can, please stay around and listen to that. And then I want to play back to you what we heard from this morning and hear some of your thoughts about what, if anything, you've heard that you're going to do differently tomorrow and do differently next week. and do differently for the rest of the coming year. So we spent most of the day talking about what has to change, what's going to be different. Nobody likes change, but navigating change is going to be fundamental to all our lives. It's just, we're in changing times, and whichever part of our lives we want to talk about, navigating change is going to be a large part of it. Change in hospitals is especially challenging, as we've talked about through most of the day, 24/7 operations, life-critical situations on a daily basis. There's a lot going on inside hospitals, and on top of that, we need you to help us with the energy transition, with decarbonization, with making the whole world a better place for the folks following us. I think many of you know I have 9 grandchildren, and talk to them a lot about what we're leaving behind to them. That matters. So, and going back to my friend David Stolte's, his comment, what were you doing during the climate crisis? It's a good question and one that we'll ponder on as we go through this. But navigating change, we've got 3 exceptional panelists that agreed to share their experience. I think it's fair to say none of them's claiming to have got this all figured out. So our panel of this group, they're fellow travelers with everybody else here. They're just willing to be up here on the stage in the spotlight and share their stories of how they're tackling the various elements of change. What does that look like? How do you work through it? So happy to welcome Michael and Tracy and Eddie as our panel. We wanted to, but as a forewarning, again, no good deed goes unpunished at Greening Healthcare. So because you've been good enough to stay, I will be picking on some of you in the audience to contribute to areas where I know you're busy right now. I know that you're active and you've got success stories and challenges to talk about in your own hospitals. So I will be reaching out to you as the session unfolds for your experiences, your contribution, and we've got actually 2 roving microphones in the room right now, so we can get to you as early as we can. So let's start by introducing you to the 3 organizations that our panelists work for. And as I say, I'll work the clicker because passing that back and forward is awkward. So just tell me when you want us to move on. So Mike, who is Northwell Health?
Yep, so my name is Mike Gentili, Senior Advisor with Northwell Health in our Energy and Infrastructure Department. So a little about Northwell Health. We're your Greening Healthcare partners from across the border. Northwell is New York's largest healthcare provider and private employer. We are made up of 27 hospitals with 13.9 million square feet and more than 900 outpatient facilities. Hospitals ranging from, and as an engineer, I tried to put this from square feet into square meters since I came across the border, ranging from 15,000 square meters up to 215 with a footprint of about 1.25 million square meters in hospital space alone, and probably closer to 3 million when you add all our outpatient facilities with that. We have 100,000 employees throughout the area, and our geographical footprint ranges from Dutchess County, New York, which is central New York, down to Westchester, into New York City, out onto Long Island, and as of recently, we ventured into Connecticut with the recent merger with Nuvance Health. So our approach to decarbonization starts with leadership, and with our leadership team, we try to empower staff to meet our sustainability targets through collaboration and providing tools to implement projects and track their progress. After that is mitigation, reducing our carbon footprint and reducing waste in all forms, by implementing various initiatives and strategies, and then resiliency. So with all the decarbonization that we're doing, at the end of the day, we're healthcare providers. Patient care, patient safety is the most important thing to us. So ensuring that the systems we are installing are robust, efficient systems that allow sites to operate during climate-related emergencies, which are becoming ever more prevalent to us year over year. So at the heart of our senior leadership, we have the Energy Steering Committee. It's a multi-departmental group within the organization that focuses on setting energy and sustainability and decarbonization targets. We have our senior leadership, our executive team, which sets the decarbonization goals. They provide oversight to the team. We have our infrastructure and engineering department, which includes our facility managers from site to site. They identify projects, they determine financial savings, and we provide tools to the operational staff to provide rebate support. And then kind of at the heart of it, we can have all these goals, we can have all these tools, but we kind of need the funding. So with a big help from our procurement team, they help develop those funding sources for projects and assist with vendor onboarding, contracts, and also procuring energy contracts.
Great, Mike, thanks. Tracy, no, we got a bit
one more.
Sorry.
Yes. So with that, we came up with kind of an energy hierarchy that we like to implement throughout the entire system. It starts with education, training, and trying to grow an energy culture across the system, tools and resources. And then we move on to energy efficiency, low-hanging fruit, a lot of our initiatives from lighting to mechanical system controls, steam system optimization, to decarbonization, where we're looking to do solar, geothermal. We actually have the first hydrogen storage project in the United States for healthcare, where we're looking to create green hydrogen from solar and wind, store it on site, and then use it with the boilers and mix it with our natural gas going into the boilers, as well as use it for fuel cell technology. And then after that, all said and done, if for some reason we still are not net zero, we have other avenues that we go and we implement, like nascent technologies and RECs and carbon offsets to achieve carbon neutrality.
That's right. We'll come back to this later, but can you just mention the regulatory interesting things you deal with there as well?
So New York State's very unique in the United States in that it has a lot of very strict regulatory policies that kind of are pushing us towards electrification. We have on the state level the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which sets emissions limits for large facilities. And then in New York City, we actually have probably the strictest regulatory policy, which is Local Law 97. So actually, a show of hands, has anyone heard of Local Law 97 or know what it is? Okay, so actually a decent amount of the group here. So for those who don't, Local Law 97 is a regulatory policy from the Department of Buildings in New York City, which is a emissions limit that they set on buildings 25,000 square feet or above. And if you exceed those limits, you pay fines and penalties for going above the threshold. Now, for some of our sites come 2030, this could lead up to anywhere between $11 to $12 million in fines. So when you look at it from a financial perspective, healthcare, especially us in downstate New York, we operate on razor-thin margins. $12 to $15 million could be a brand new wing of the hospital that we were planning to build, or a major system and infrastructure. Imperative important for us to really focus on decarbonization, not just because it's good for the environment. I mean, we have a big push for corporate social responsibility initiatives, but from a regulatory perspective as well, there's major financial implications if we don't meet our targets and our goals.
As Mike, we talked earlier today about governments got limited tools at their disposal for enacting, for pushing us or encouraging us down the path of decarbonization. Codes and standards is one. We can expect change there. But grants, incentives, and fines is the other. Governments can do that. So the idea of Local Law 97 is possibly shades of things to come. Because again, the climate crisis is not going away. We will find solutions, and some might be more painful than others. And $11, $12 million a year, that does get your attention. Tracy, tell us about Baycrest.
Hello. Hi, I'm Tracy Clatworthy. I'm a project manager in redevelopment at Baycrest Corporate Center for Geriatric Care, and I also do sustainability. Baycrest is a unique facility. We're on 23 acres. We have a hospital, long-term care home, research tower, and 2 residential facilities, one for assisted living or independent living, and the assisted living is for memory care or specializes in memory care. Across all of that, there's about 1,100 beds in total. We're also unique in that we have the same amount of volunteers as we do staff. So there's 2,000 staff, 2,000 volunteers. We're affiliated with University of Toronto, and we advise governments and public sectors on healthcare policy and innovative models of geriatric care. So we also specialize in geriatrics and brain health. So this is just kind of a snapshot of our campus. We're very horizontal. It doesn't look as big as it is. I get about 15,000 to 20,000 steps a day in. My feet are sore when I get home. So I just wanted to highlight this. We don't talk about greening, the Green Hospital Scorecard enough. These are some of the other streams that contribute to reducing your carbon footprint. And so when I joined Baycrest in 2023, I submitted our data from 2022, and we won Green Hospital of the Year. A big part of that is landfill diversion. Leadership, obviously policy planning and looking at our energy and water use intensities. This is just, I like to show this each year on Earth Day and to show the resources that we've saved from some of the things that we've diverted from landfill. A lot of streams, people, you know, I do a lot of, with the project world and construction, when I come and renovate a space, a lot of times furniture, equipment, things like that end up in landfill. So I try my best to repurpose them in the organization, and I work with charities to send to Africa and things like that. So it's also a feel-good story. And one of the main things that we're working on right now with Enter Life and utilizing incentives from ISO and Bridge is our existing building recommissioning study. So we finished the first phase where we looked at all of our equipment across the organization. And now we're starting to kind of zero in on one of the few things that I'm working on right now is LED lighting replacements, VFD, on our air handling units and our chiller, and I'm also starting to study chiller optimization at the main hospital and one of our residential facilities.
Excellent. So Eddie, give us an overview of William Osler. I know it best as the lowest carbon intensity hospital as one of your portfolio that we have in greening healthcare, so tell us the rest.
Yes, my name is Eddie Camilleri. I am the Director of Building Services for William Osler. I also look after sustainability and energy throughout the entire portfolio. So we have 4 care sites. They are, 3 of them are in Brampton, 1 of them is in Etobicoke. Brampton is the largest, one of the first P3 contracts in Ontario. We have a very interesting setup. It's very complex. We have 4 different sites, and we have 4 P3 partners. We operate 2 sites with a Osler facility staff. On one site, we have 2 different buildings. We just built a wing, and so again, Osler operates one of the facilities, and we have a P3 partner for another one, and another P3 partner for a different building all on the same campus. So there's a lot of complexities when we're looking into energy projects or even just maintenance and operations. We have about 2.6 million square feet. So I want square feet instead of meters, just for you. And so, yes, and then so for Peel Memorial, we do have a geothermal site, and it's one of the top. Is it the top, or is it one of the top?
It is the lowest carbon intensity.
So again, full props to Honeywell, who's our service provider. They originally, when the building was commissioned, we would go into these energy meetings, and we would talk about the energy model not being set up properly. They're like, we'll never get to that point. We'll never get to that threshold that we promised you. And because it was a pain share, gain share model, we'll be in pain share. And there was a very dedicated energy engineer, and they actually went through the process, and they went through the system and really, really went through, each component and really made it work. And it's running way better than it ever was before. And they're still in pain share, but it is significantly less than it was before. So we have about 870 inpatient beds. We serve in Brampton, BCH, Brampton Civic is I think it's the most used emergency center in the province. So very busy, very hard to do any kind of facility upgrade, just maintaining the facility. And just one other thing. So from a LEED perspective, we have 2 buildings that are LEED silver and one that's LEED gold from a sustainability standpoint.
Right, so now we've met our panel, and a significant part of this now flows down to everybody else in the audience, all the hospitals here right now. And with help from the IESO, we've been working for a year now with a group of hospitals that are among the most successful of our membership in terms of energy efficiency over the years. So we went back to 2019, pre-COVID. How have people done? So we've got this kind of long-term trend, picked a number of our most successful hospitals and spent a good deal of time interviewing them and looking at the numbers and talking about their plans and their organizational situations, and wound up with this construct that's here for your consideration. And we'll be publishing this within the next few weeks as part of the report. You'll find it already in the recording, which you see the link to there, of a webinar we had on this earlier this year on strategic energy management, which is the whole idea of technically there's always things to be done. There's boilers to be tuned and equipment to be scheduled, but the most successful hospitals are always found to be the ones that are better organized internally, have more commitment from management, have board approval, sometimes within the strategic plan for the hospital, have operators. We refer to this as when you're engaged all the way from the boardroom to the operating room with the clinicians to the boiler room with the facilities department. That's when things really start happening, because you're not overcoming any internal friction anymore. It's hard enough to doing this when all wind is in your sails. But this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this I'd offer to everybody to consider the how you manage your energy data. We heard a lot a while ago from Manitoba Shared Health and from Alberta Health Services. They've obviously got massive portfolios, but if you can't manage your energy data, you're flying blind. So what are the most successful hospitals? How do they manage their data is a question which we're going to explore with our panel in a moment, and hopefully with you as well. The operational efficiency goes in parallel with that. You don't have to wait to get all of your data sorted out before you start scheduling systems and adjusting controls and getting people involved and making the low-hanging fruit, the operational improvements, all the stuff we looked at earlier over the course of the day. So how effective is the organization in managing operational efficiency and making the scheduling, controls, adjustments, rebalancing changes that you've heard about earlier today? If you get those done, you're going down the path, and then when you're managing the energy data, you'll see the savings, as Amandeep likes to say, the blue dots below the red dots. Capital planning, we talked about that earlier today. Is your capital planning aligned with the inevitable move towards decarbonization over time? Are you looking at your capital plan where every project on that list is a potential step towards the low carbon future? So capital planning, how do different hospitals manage that? Resources are always there. As everybody says, if I had limitless time and limitless money, I could do anything. I'm not sure that's true because you need limitless knowledge as well that goes with that, but you put those things together. But how do the most successful hospitals manage resources? You've heard some interesting comments today about, I got somebody who does this and somebody who does that, and but we're very familiar with hospitals that's got one person that does all of it. So how does the hospital allocate resources? How do they figure out how many people you need in what positions doing what kinds of things? To what extent does scale help? So if you're bigger, you can do more. And if that's the case, how can we help the smaller hospitals? What kind of support do they need? Resources also looks externally. How well are you making use of your service contractors? You got service contractors in your building that look after dozens of buildings just like yours. Dozens of buildings. They got so much knowledge, so much experience. Have you aligned your contracts in such a way that they have the opportunity to push that kind of idea forward to you for your consideration? And are you open to modifying your service contracts to make them partners in energy efficiency, not just the people who come in once a week or once a month to make sure everything's at least ticking over? And the final step is the big one we've heard so much about, organizational alignment from, once again, from the boardroom to the operating room to the boiler room. Is everybody on board? Are they all engaged? Are they excited about what you're doing? Do they even know about what you're doing? So for your consideration, and it's late in the day, I appreciate that, but roll over in your minds, if you were able to get these 5 things right, would that solve most of your issues in terms of moving forward and continuing forward with effective energy efficiency, moving towards decarbonization? So that is the premise of this final session. We want to explore it with our panelists, but if I may, I'll ask for volunteer thoughts and ideas and insights from the audience. And as I say, I may reserve the right to pick on a couple of you if we don't get enough feedback. So this is the construct. Think about it. How does it apply to your hospital? Does it apply? Think about where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, where the biggest areas of opportunity are. And in no particular order, Mike, I'm going to start with you, but energy data, I've seen so many cool dashboards and so on, how well, and you've got 27 sites, I thought it was 26, but obviously another one showing up there. Yep. How well have you got the data managed, and how does your organization use it to hold people accountable, to drive progress, to identify priorities?
Our data management has been pretty robust since probably back in 2009. I would say when looking at the strategic energy management list, energy performance management, benchmark rankings, targets and savings potentials is something that we have really excelled in since as far back as that moment. We released annual greenhouse gas reporting metrics to each site where they get to see year over year how they're trending. We have dashboards that we release to all of the executive leadership teams as well as our facility managers that show them their energy profile as well as their savings from participation in our energy programs. We are regularly meeting with staff to go through these analytics and to plan for future projects. So from an energy performance standpoint, I think that's where we really are doing our best.
Decent. So the fundamental knowledge, like, do you know how much Northwell across, at least not the most recent acquisitions, but across your legacy sites, how much you saved last year? Is that a number that's top of mind with you, with your boss, with the executive?
Not year over year, but total savings we do. I know off of about a $20 million spend, our aggregate savings are roughly 40, 41. If you were to include as savings...
Was that millions?
Millions.
Okay, yeah. I like that number.
Millions.
Yeah.
If you were to include our energy procurement savings, hedging contracts, if you were to include rebates and incentives, if you were to include penalties through regulatory policies that we've been able to avoid over time, you could go as high as, I think, 70 million is the number that we have. So the dashboard's there for the organization to see. And one of the big ways we really like to engage the organization is through something that we have called resource groups. So business enterprise resource groups. And one of the Bergs that we have is called the Greenberg, and it's a sustainability resource group. And it allows people from all over the organization who are interested in energy and sustainability to join for monthly and quarterly calls. And we usually report out on how we've been performing through that resource group. And it's that engagement which really allows us to build that culture and spread that word from, us as a little group of 10 employees to 100,000 employees across, multiple counties in a large geographic territory.
Yeah, I want to come back to your incentives a bit later, because I love to see Julian cry and Vicky's glasses messed up, because it's always fun. But let's move on to operations. We're gonna keep going around this wheel. It's not kind of one stop on the way, but on the operations side, especially with your newer facilities, so you've got that mix, Eddie, and I think you were one of the few A's on got the scheduling part right. Talk to us about how effectively you've been able to get things like scheduling put into place across the different hospitals, because they're quite different situations, aren't they?
They are very different. On the HVAC side, it's a lot. It's a huge job trying to keep this straight. For the most part, with Peel being a relatively smaller site in mostly clinical space, that's one's fairly easy, right? And a lot of things are automated, so it makes life simple. But when you have a hospital like Etobicoke General that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure, it becomes a little bit more reliant on your technicians and control techs, making sure that the schedules are set properly. And then for Brampton, there's so many changes that we have. We'll have calls with our facility team from the Ellis Don side, and understanding that they have their priority with the software side and making sure that that's up and running. But then from a departmental side, it's up to us as business partners to inform them of changes. So then it's a bit of a two-way communication stream. So we have to allow them to make changes when we know of the changes, and so that they can incorporate that and they can reduce as much as they can. It's really about communication and just having a snapshot of the facility.
That's great. As you say, it's you got different scales here. One hospital, 4 hospitals, and too many hospitals. Tracy, pick up on that. You were good enough to fill in a checklist that we're putting online as well, by the way. We have a checklist for self-evaluation of where you stand on all of these things. That if you're okay to share it with us, we find that really helpful, because again, we can then focus our efforts. But you marked these operational improvements as being kind of early stage for you guys at Baycrest. You mentioned the recommissioning projects you have in mind. What's Baycrest's thought process around operational improvements, the staff involved, and how all of that's going to work?
Well, we've been working closely with facilities. A few people have, I think it was Harry in the last session, with the finding equipment on hand, finding in the BAS that they're not following the sequence of operations that are in place. So it's been working with them to relook at these things. We've engaged Smith and Anderson as well for this to help us go in the right direction and make sure that things are set up the way they should be. What else do we have? We are looking at testing and rebalancing our HVAC systems. We find a lot of times that dampers are open, and even with like the chiller optimization, we're going to be studying the flow of water to see if things are open and it's doing what it's supposed to do to make sure that we're optimizing it to the best of its ability.
So you're a fairly new team there. Remind me, when did you and Andrew arrive at Baycrest to start working on this stuff?
2023.
Okay.
And I think we started this in, I think, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wasn't the first year.
Okay, so not only just not starting from scratch, you've got an existing operational facility, but new team, new blood, new eyes, new insights. Interesting to see forward. Let's keep going around the circle for a bit here. Get into capital planning, and there's a lot of conversation today around how do you use your, and Andrew Blair, I'm going to pick on you. I think you're in the room. You got a call? Okay, so we'll rugby tackle him later if we can, but the capital planning piece that I found that not a completely fulfilling part of the conversation earlier today, that the idea of you've got a vision of where we need to get to and you use all the resources, so you're using HERF to get you to where you need to be as opposed to just replacing or whatever equipment at the end of life. So this idea of managing your destiny, of using publicly available money, including grants and incentives, but infrastructure money through there. So if Andrew rejoins us, I'll be interested to see how he manages that particular system, because managing the system seems to be the key. Mike, where do you guys get your capital dollars from to do the good work that you're doing?
It's typically not publicly, available money. Typically, it's funding that we have through the healthcare system. Sometimes we have to go out, as a private organization and get bonds or grants. So most of the money we get is privately acquired. So when it comes to capital planning, it was interesting to me talking with the group today and hearing about how you all, through HERP and through, these other, programs are doing a building condition assessment on a yearly basis. That's something that as private organizations and private healthcare in the United States, we do on a rolling basis, but it's really only a couple, maybe every 5 to 10 years that we're renewing our building conditions assessment. So one thing we've done, we have a capital project management team. One of the things we always found as kind of a pain point with that is value engineering of certain infrastructure components. So we actually have since created an infrastructure and engineering department that specifically focuses on aging infrastructure and coming up with strategic master planning from site to site for infrastructure alone. And it has its own funding source to be able to tackle that. So
Is that your group or another group?
it's another group. Rob, we mentioned that.
Yes.
Yeah. So Rob heads that group up. We touch base with him. Typically, he's got projects, planned out for 3 to 5 years, and we'll go through that with him and try to identify ones that could have a decarbonization or energy component to it, and try to make sure that we start from an early, A&E design, get involved in order to make sure we're steering things in the right direction.
And you mentioned earlier your 2 Staten Island hospitals, the north
Yes.
and south ones. All of the air handling units are up for replacement over some period of time, and early thoughts about strategically how you would handle that to make sure decarbonization's in there.
Yep, and that's where, having a set of design standards and guidelines to give to the engineers and the architects up front helps to save us from, change orders in order to redesign or ripping equipment out down the road, because what we have in there isn't conducive to the deep decarbonization efforts and targets that we're trying to hit. Most of the hospitals that we have in the area, well, actually all of them, operate off of a steam plant, whether it's boilers that create steam or we have district steam available. So a lot of what we typically would do in the past is like for like replacement, and So we'd have steam preheat coils, steam reheat, steam to hot water heat exchangers for domestic hot water. So being able to really set those design standards and guidelines and give those from an early on, to the capital planning teams allows us to make sure that our decarbonization goals can be easily achieved down the road. So making sure that we're putting in, heat recovery units, but that requires that we don't have steam preheat coils. We need to switch over to a glycol coil instead. So, it's going to be piecemeal to how we do it, but those design standards are going to be important.
So if I may, and you can decline if you wish, I'd love to just pick on Scarborough Health Network just for interest. The first 3 sections here: managing energy data, operational improvements, capital planning. Are there any of these ideas you've heard from the panel that resonate with you guys? The microphone's right behind you.
Yeah, very much so. Like, in terms of, our first topic about the air handling units and, looking at that, that's something that, we've been, looking at and now just confirms our suspicions. So, yeah, you're leading us in the right direction.
And Ralph, could you just touch briefly on your history with Durham College, right? Because that was quite a different environment. And that transition into healthcare, we think you're bringing a lot of ideas and good blood into the sector. Well, what kind of insights are you bringing from the post-secondary sector that can help with hospitals?
I was fortunate enough to spend 30 years in the post-secondary environment. And, the thing that was, beneficial there was that we not only, basically practiced it, we taught it. So it was like a full, circle of events. And, it was everything from, basically, cogen plants to geothermal to solar to like, we did it all. And the thing is too, like, as part of it was probably the most, rewarding for me was that we created a school of renewable energy. And, that facility was net zero. And, you got to see the, reap the benefits of it. So basically we practiced it, we sold it, we taught it. So, it gave me that full circle of appreciation. And, coming into healthcare, which, was basically new to me, I'm, trying to basically take those learnings from the past and apply them where I do see, a tremendous amount of benefit.
Any interns coming out of that program that could be helping in hospitals?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Okay, let's work on that one as well, because that kind of support is needed and takes us nicely into the next box on resources. And Eddie, love to turn to you. It's so do you have enough resources to manage the 4 sites you've got? Do you have the right capabilities within those resources? Are they well trained? If not, what training do they need? So internally, how are you positioned to manage your task?
Well, we doubled our resources on the project, which is fantastic. And that was actually done through the EM program, through IESO. But I jokingly, I was the only energy manager at the time. Ultimately, we have hired an individual to assess and to help us, who's here today, Bahar. And but that's from the hospital side. We also have, again, we have 4 different partners that we rely on quite heavily to manage the utility consumption and the energy consumption between not all of our P3 partners. So, Elliston's in the back, and they look after Brampton. Without them being the hands-on component, it would make things very difficult, right? We also utilize, and when you look at resources, I'm actually just thinking about this really kind of now, but I mean, Blackstone, huge resource from a utility reporting point of view. Your team, like we actually sit down with our energy teams, and I'm saying multiple teams because each hospital has its own team. But we utilize the reports that you provide us And we go to them and we ask them, like, it's great that you guys are giving us reports, but we're giving you now a report. What's this? Can you help us with this part? How do we address this piece of, this higher energy? What is that? Can you tell us what's happened in your operations that would rectify that or that would cause that? When you look at resources, I think, looking at that whole box, the other piece is the incentive piece, right? And there's like, you look at Julian and Enbridge, we have to utilize those resources. So it's not only one or two people that are actually, doing that work. You just have to network your team because not one person can do it all anyways. So you utilize the resources that you have in this room to make your hospital, a better place. And the last thing I'll say about the incentives, from an Enbridge point of view, is they are willing to work with you. So if the project is actually not viable, you can actually go up to them and ask them for additional funds. And if they see fit and if they see the benefit in the program, they'll actually help you out.
Perfect. Andrew, welcome back. I think maybe Tracy gave you a heads up. I'm going to pick on you. Can you talk a little bit about capital planning and how you work towards a vision as opposed to simply taking the money that's given to you? How do you work? I hate to say it. How do you work the system of capital planning, HERF, and everything else to get Baycrest to where it needs to go?
Well, number one, I never look a gift horse in the mouth. If there's money, I'm going to spend it. But yeah, it's been easier now that I'm at the executive level to get the executive's ear. We're very fortunate to have sustainability in our strategic plan, which means there's a board level accountability, which really makes it easy for me to have a reason to demonstrate every year that we're doing something. And something usually means something tangible enough that the board can see. So where we focus, and I'm sure Tracy has talked about that, we've been focusing on some of those low-hanging fruits, LED lights, ventilation systems. We've heard about it all day, scheduling and setbacks. And now we're venturing into retro commissioning because that's the next step. But because it's embedded in our strategic vision and our 5-year plan, the board is always very interested in what we'll do now and what we'll do in the future to continue to live that strategy.
That is great. Thank you. Again, you've got to have a plan, and you execute on the plan using whatever's available. I like that. Let's move on to that idea of incentives for a moment. If any Ontario hospital in here hasn't buttonholed Vicky and Julian and his colleagues yet, and you have just a little bit of time left to make that happen. But Mike, talk a little bit about in New York with the utilities there, with the regulatory regime there. What kind of incentives are you seeing? Let's raise our bar a little bit. But to be fair, the province is authorizing significant increases in incentives here as well. So both in natural gas and electricity, that world is improving for us all, which is always a good thing. But you've got to stay connected with what's latest, and we've got the people in the room to help you. But talk a bit about New York.
In New York, incentives come from two areas. It could be your local utility, or it can come from the state. So local utility, for example, in New York City, you have Consolidated Edison, who manages the electric, steam, and in some areas, the natural gas grid. And then on Long Island, we have PSEG Long Island for the electric side, National Grid on the natural gas side. Through our bills, we pay into a service benefit charge, and then through that service benefit charge, money gets allocated towards different programs. On the state side, we have an organization called NYSERDA, New York State Energy and Research Developmental Authority. Yep. they provided, initiatives. So when it comes to solar, when it comes to hydrogen, wind power, thermal storage, battery storage, they typically have funding pools that you could pull from to implement projects of that nature. But when it comes to your low-hanging fruit, your LED lighting, your controls, your VFDs, to set points and control sequences, building automation system upgrades, that's going to go through the utility. But the utility, from the direction of the state, may change those funding sources. In the past, LED lighting was a major source of rebates. And as of recent, they've kind of found that market to be saturated, so they've removed LED lighting rebates altogether. You can still implement it. In most cases, with costs coming down, it's still pretty cheap and still has a good payback, but they've now since reallocated those rebates towards building envelope and tougher to implement items that they really feel need a little bit more extra help in order to get people to move on.
If you move to the state level, the Empire Building Challenge is an interesting one, isn't it?
The Empire Building Challenge is a $30 million pool that really focused on really large replicable projects in healthcare that really focused on deep decarbonization. It was up to $5 million that you could win per project. I think up to maybe 70% cost share on the projects as well. Healthcare systems from all throughout the state were able to apply for it. We ended up winning 3 of those 6 projects. One of them we're working on with Ian and Amandeep in Maryland Jewish Medical Center, where we're implementing heat recovery chillers at our Katz Women's Center. And then we've got 2 other projects. One's in Peconic Bay, where we're looking to do geothermal ground source loop for our chillers, and the other one is in Phelps Hospital, which is a heat recovery chiller that's going to be tied into our reheats and domestic hot water loop.
And going back to the idea, there's only so many things governments can do. They can fine you, and they can give you buckets of money. And while the appetite for that in Ontario is not high right now, life is long, and expect some of those things to come, because it really is moving mountains in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, healthcare, razor-thin margins. We really rely on these grants and incentives to really, give us a leg up when presenting projects to senior leadership to give us the money. We're always competing with, aging infrastructure that needs immediate replacement, or building new ORs or procedure suites, or, new buildings. So if there's ways that we can really, show that the project's got a quick payback, typically under 5 years, it usually bodes well for us that we'll be able to procure funding at the end of the day, and the grants and incentives help a lot.
And you have the Katz Women's Hospital as part of Long Island Jewish Medical Center. Needless to say, Mike is a Mets fan. Google it, you'll figure it out. Tracy, I just want to touch on you as well. You have had a history of building strong relationships with outside service providers that you trust, rely. They got to know how you do work. Can you talk a bit about that? How do you use outside resources to make good things happen in the hospital?
All right.
There
Sorry
you are.
about that. Sorry, your question was outside.
External resources,
External
service contractors,
resources.
consultants.
Yeah, we rely heavily on consultants to help us review our systems and make sure that we're doing the right thing. Utilizing the incentive programs, not just ISO and Enbridge, but looking for things beyond that, seeing if there's grants, any kind of government funding, things that we can do with that. And then also from, and I know I talked about this before, but from a diversion, also working with some of those vendors on some of the free programs that we can utilize, because, waste generation does contribute to greenhouse gases. So a lot of times I partner with various organizations to get these things covered for free.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm going to do another reach out with your permission, Mike Lithgow, is as you look at so we got through 4 hubs of the wheel so far. As you look at those, where's your feeling right now that Sunnybrook's strengths are, and where are the biggest areas of opportunity from an organizational alignment standpoint?
Thanks for calling me out again, Ian.
That's my job.
Appreciate it. I'd say the resources is the biggest constraint. There's just so much to do. It's not a lack of ideas, it's just getting the manpower to do it. Not just someone to lead it, but all the people who need to be involved, whether on the operational side or clinical side, they're all extremely busy. In our organization's Green Task Force, we can't keep the nurses engaged, for instance, and they're a critical piece of it.
Yeah.
But they've got hectic schedules, they've got shift work, very tough for them to get involved, so we have to better find ways of sort of engaging them ad hoc. And to a lesser extent, that's true for all across the organization. But on the other hand, on the strength side, I'd say we're starting to get going on to number 5 now, if I can.
Yeah, please.
The organizational alignment, we're starting to get traction there, I think.
What does that look like?
With our Green Task Force, that is not just an energy group in the facilities department. It's more of an organization spanning entity with clinicians, with administrative, with senior management, and energy is one sort of, just one aspect of that, but tying it in with the bigger framework, the sustainability framework, the quality improvement, social responsibility, I think gives it strength without diluting it. And so I'd say we're getting some traction there.
It's like we've been rehearsing all week, because that's a great segue into section 5, which I do want to explore with the panelists. And there's so many aspects of this. We've touched a few times on clinicians. And I'd say quite fairly, IPAC and clinicians were one of the challenges we were dealing with 5 years ago. Today, they're challenged in the totally opposite way, that they're pushing us to do things faster than necessarily technically we're able to accomplish. But Mike, if I could come back to you, really interested in clinician involvement at Long Island Jewish and more broadly in Northwell Health. Where do they fit in the puzzle?
If you were to ask me that question 5-6 years ago, I'd say that was one of our biggest hurdles, is getting clinician and senior leadership support. If you were to ask me that now, I'd say that it's switched a complete 180, and they're some of our biggest advocates at this point. As I mentioned before, we really started pushing through our resource groups to vocalize the work that we're doing. And, over time, it made its way to where the CEO of the organization really made sustainability one of the core, beliefs that he wanted to work on as part of the organization. And he made a strong push as part of a, corporate social responsibility initiative to push sustainability and decarbonization. So when you can find your way to that executive leadership level, it all then kind of trickles downhill. As a result of that, we already had the Energy Steering Committee developed, but as a part of, it coming from the top down, we appointed a chief sustainability officer, Donna Drummond. We have, co-chairs on the sustainability group, her and one of my leaders, Charles Cutchall. And, it led to the development of green teams in most of our sites where we have, similar to Mike and Stony Brook, it's a multi-departmental collaborative effort where we have clinicians, we have anesthesiologists, we have nurses, we have executive leadership at the sites as part of this energy team really pushing for sustainability on their end. I always give the example of operating rooms. In the past, if we wanted to walk in through the door and tell someone, hey, you have tracking pairs in your operating rooms and a robust control system, we could do an OR, nighttime setback schedule for you. The clinicians always were the biggest roadblock and hurdle to us getting approval to move forward on that because they were always hesitant on the technology to even want to implement it. But when you start to get the clinicians involved in the green team and they start researching and doing their own, investigation into these different technologies, now they're the ones coming to us saying, hey, come in, talk to us about OR setback scheduling. We would love to implement this. So it's funny how, in the past they told me to close the door on the way out, and now they're opening it for me to come in and to talk about how we can implement it sooner rather than later.
So we met Dr. Bartok, who's the champion at Long Island Jewish, an anesthesiologist. I've had to learn to manage all those syllables over time. But connected him with Anita Rao, who many of you know. She was our keynote 2 years ago at the forum, who's an anesthesiologist at Trillium Health. When those folks get together, and the common cause there is getting rid of central nitrous systems, which are just evil, wicked abuses to the climate that's readily fixable. And when we get this kind of cross-border networking, it just fills our heart with joy. A couple of minutes left. I hadn't realized, Andrew, that you had gotten sustainability into the strategic plan at Baycrest. I was only aware previously of North York General, and I'm guessing there's a common factor there. So, which means reports to the board on a regular basis on meeting targets, and I'm assuming those targets are typically linked to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Any other hospitals in the room have sustainability in that way in their hospital strategic plan? Somebody raised their hand, but I think it was a glass of water. Sunnybrook does? Does it report to the board? Okay, that's the key, that the board takes an interest. So once you get reporting to the board, as you say, when you're reporting to the board and when Dr. Bartok is calling the CEO, good things happen. Eddie, please, yeah.
Yeah, so we actually just went through accreditation, and so accreditation has changed. There's been a couple of iterations, but the first time I went through accreditation, there was a number of leadership standards about making sure that the hospital was safe, right? From are you doing operationally? Are you maintaining your building? How, prove to me that you're doing this. And I think there was one item talking about energy. The latest iteration that we just did, there were, I believe, 6 or 7. So there's a lot more, but it's all about sustainability. And it's talking about, actually, does the board know about what you're doing? Is there communication? So that's actually now part of that. It's a requirement.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. This is good.
Speaking on accreditation, in the U.S. we have the Joint Commission accreditation that is revolving, and very similarly to Eddie, what you were talking about in the past, it was primarily focused on safety and patient care. And as of recently, a lot of energy and sustainability aspects have become part of that accreditation process. and they actually had a sustainable, actually was looking it up because I couldn't remember the name of it, sustainable healthcare certification that you can get as part of that accreditation. And actually North Shore University Hospital was, I think, the first one. If I definitely know in New York State, but maybe it could have been the US as well, I'll have to check, but definitely in New York State, the first hospital to achieve that sustainable healthcare certification. So similarly, we're seeing it really come into that accreditation process, which obviously makes it, more visible to our leadership teams.
Go ahead, Eddie. Yeah, this is leadership from the top. I love it.
No, and what's interesting about this is that the criteria that's stipulated in there, it actually talks about, it's not only that does the executive team know, it's the question, the real driver about it, it's actually, do your frontline staff know? Do they know what you're doing? Are they involved? How do you move this forward? So during accreditation, beforehand, when we're preparing for this, we started to, like, a whole communication channel. There's a website, almost kind of like UHN's. We kind of, again, utilize your resources. We utilized UHN quite a bit. They were fantastic with helping us, providing us with some material. We ended up using it and replicating it to move it forward, to preach the same things that we're already doing. And we actually also we implemented a green team, so where volunteer champions are looking at their departments and bringing forward these initiatives. And then one other thing we did was at all new orientation sessions for all of our new staff, we actually have energy and sustainability. It's actually the first topic that we talk about after our CEO gives the introduction. And what we do is we say, look, guys, we are taking care of the hospital. Here's all the great things that we're doing. How are you guys going to help us do this? And we look at it from an energy point of view and a sustainability point of view. So all the recycling, tell them what's recyclable, what's not. Tell them that, I always end up saying, we're like the parents of the house. We take care of all of the infrastructure, but you guys are participants. So you're going to be helping us. You're going to be making us achieve our goals.
Panel, this has been great. So we needed to end one on a high note because there are so many good things happening out there. We got a lot of hospitals still in the room. If some of these things you're not doing, you can easily connect with these guys. You can connect with them through Michael Pagel. All of that can be done. But panel, thanks for an uplifting end to a thoughtful day. Round of applause. And you can return to your seats. You want to go back to your seats, and if you'd like. So we'll let them get back to the seats so I can pick on them more easily down there. But we just have the closing. Thanks for making it this far. You need to stick around for the last piece, which is going back to where we began at the start of the day, which is a call to action. So this is not about ideas. It's not about would-have-beens, nice-have-haves. This is about stuff we need to get done, and the idea that every single person in this room has an opportunity and a responsibility to take the action that we can take, and hopefully today has provided more insights on what kind of actions they are, and they're practical. You don't have to wait for money to make organizational adjustments, to make operational improvements. In fact, you can contribute savings there, and we've given you a number of examples where that's happening already. So just want to play through what we heard, and I'm interested if the hospitals in the room could raise your hands if you're leaving today with one new insight, one new idea that is actionable on a go-forward basis. So we talked about energy efficiency. Did people hear anything? And please raise your hand if you did. If nobody raises the hand, then I'm going to go and get drunk after this. So, but with respect to energy efficiency, any new ideas, new insights, things you're going to do tomorrow that you might not otherwise have done? Anybody raise their hands? Thank you. You give, is the mic, are the mics on the move? Here we go. Gentleman in the gray shirt. Yes. you raise your hand? Okay, yes. Sorry, you're on stage.
Well, this is on a radar, but we haven't considered it in the past. But when I heard more about this water plant optimization, maybe this is something we need to do.
Okay.
Especially when you have a field like wastewater energy transfer project, unfortunately. We should, well.
That's a giant, yeah.
Yeah, this is something shouldn't happen, but the aftermath is maybe we should look after our water plant to improve the efficiency. This is something we have done later in the past, unfortunately.
Okay, good to hear, thank you. An asset renewal and doing a strategic approach to HERF and capital planning. Did anybody hear anything there that might change the way they do things going forward? Eddie. Microphone's coming.
I think from my point of view, I've looked at it where we don't do a good job, I don't think, where we really look at the energy component of this from a HERF point of view. It's really, we look at it as more of this is just a maintenance issue. So, what Band-Aid are you putting on the unit, or what are you refurbishing? Versus looking at it from an energy point of view as well and saying, here are some opportunities that we have. Actually, so we are just starting that because we did that with your BPOP program.
Yes.
We had the reports. We actually took it to our facility team, said, during HERF, look at some of these items. Like, now's the time to be, planning this process so that you have an idea of a project that you can implement when it comes down to HERF. And there's more of a communication from like the energy team to the facility team.
That's very helpful. That raises the idea of lenses, right? The lenses we're used to looking at decision making through. And typically it's service, healthcare service, and budget. And the idea of sustainability being the third lens is a really interesting idea. So you're right, these things are not a maintenance issue anymore. They're a maintenance issue plus sustainability. So those lenses, decision making is going to be a big thing we plan to tackle at the forum coming up in November. Sorry, was there another? Well, let's work our way through the cycle. We had a debrief. It's the first time we've done this peer group process in this way. Got a lot of feedback from the room. We learned something about managing the tables, making sure that there's at least 2 hospitals at every table. We'll think about maybe moving tables closer together next time so you can kind of work better as groups. So we think the process we can improve a bit. We'll probably advise common industry partners like boiler service companies and so on to spread out across the tables. One of the bad things at these events is you tend to sit with the people you already know, and that's so you learn everything that you already know. So that how we arrange the tables we thought was a big thing. We thought the discussion and feedback was just amazing. The energy level was great, and we got a lot of pushback saying there just wasn't time. By the time we got warmed up, Amandeep would jump up here and wave his arms around and say, it's over, next one. We will do a combination next time of leaving more time for this, but also narrowing down our focus on how many issues we want to deal with. But really tribute to everybody in the room. We really appreciated how everybody engaged with that. And we're encouraged, and I promise you at the summer workshop next year, you'll see more of the same. So the peer group process for us was a success and something, as always, we can improve. We gave some new information on what's happening with high performance new hospital construction. I mentioned this morning. Once again, if we went back 3 years, it was not a success story. As of now, we're seeing so many new hospitals going through the pathway of just continuous improvement after they opened. Did anybody with new hospitals in the pipeline hear something that was interesting that they might do differently, a question they're going to ask when they get back to the office? Any positive feedback on that session? Eddie, you again? Love you for it, and it keeps Michael on his toes. That's good.
So no, we are actively designing PMC2, and we're looking at geothermal. There's a lot of discussions that are happening right now. We are talking about a total energy target, but it's great that we're talking at a high level. But now, as we're going through construction, it's about showing me those numbers and breaking it down and providing details so that we can have something to look forward, because the project unfortunately does not have the M to it. And I know all the questions when we don't meet those energy targets are still going to happen. We're still going to ask the same question. The person who's going to have to answer it is going to be me.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place up front, and we know and we understand what the targets are, so that when that rubber hits the road, we can actually analyze it.
So as another thought that came out of that, it was implicit, but to make it explicit, we see a profoundly different role for commissioning agents on a bigger role, a more integrated role, working directly for the hospital, funded by IO, and in place right through the process, that effectively fills the role that Glenn, you were talking about, like who is looking at every design decision. If you know at the end you're not responsible for the outcome, then yeah, value engineering, engineers all the value out of the hospital. So this idea of the profoundly, and we'll have that ready for the end of the year as well, but the commissioning agent, we think, just takes on a whole new role, a much more exalted role and a much more skilled role, and effectively takes accountability on the hospital's behalf, whether it's a DBF or a DBFM. Doesn't make any difference. It's the same role. So that was very helpful. Thank you. Any other thoughts to add in? The recommissioning section, sorry. Yes.
Ian, I've been holding back because you didn't really exactly ask a question for which I'm going to speak to here. I'm actually surprised in not hearing more people talking about using AI, leveraging AI to optimize their building automation systems. I've heard a lot of comments about restrictive resources needing to do things faster, wiser, and whatnot. Continuously changing condition, that becomes a challenge for the hospitals to manage as well. I would suggest and maybe present this to be a thought or maybe a challenge to the groups here to look for maybe AI platforms where you can leverage to continuously optimize your building in a very smart and intelligent way. There are technologies out there that are vendor agnostic. So because you were asking for input from hospitals, so I've been holding back, but I feel that I would be remiss if I don't make that a point.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think as everybody could agree, the AI is a buzzword, but it's developing. Everybody's learning from what are the capabilities out there, like what can we do with use, and especially as AI is going to solve us resource challenges. And as we learn through that process, there's going to be a lot of discussions, and probably we'll bring this back at the forum where we looked at different solutions out there and what's actually helping hospitals. The reason, like everything for us is all data and the case studies. So once we start this practical implementation through hospitals, we'll bring that back to the group and say, look, this has actually worked, and here's another resource, you can use it. So that's how we approach all of these items. Thanks for bringing that.
So if, picking up on that, the last group session we had, it's fresh enough in our minds. I don't want to repeat myself, but if you get organizational alignment right, if you get everybody together on the bus, on the same page, it's curious how everything else falls into place. Miles talked earlier about when he looks at a hospital that's got the good energy numbers, then when he goes and talks to the facilities people, they got no problems. It's just working really, really well. The ones with the bad energy numbers, everything's wrong. It's the same with organizations, hospital, healthcare organizations. When you have everything lined up from the strategic plan and the board level to the senior leadership team being aware, being on board, to the clinicians, to the departments being involved, to the facility staff, to the operators, to your outside contractors, feeling enabled, feeling part of the team, feeling partnership, that dynamic is gold. And then suddenly all the good decisions get made You don't have to push it anymore. You don't have to drive it anymore. You just give them data and they run away there. So the organizational alignment piece. Did anybody hear anything there that, again, rang a bell that sounds like something we can address, we can embrace? If not, it's the end of the day. And again, we forgive everybody, and I'm not going to go get drunk, I promise that. So, but what we heard was great. We appreciated the feedback, and it will guide us in terms of our marching orders. Just closing out the session for today. And again, thank you all for still being here. You know, there's always pressures at the end of the day to go and check what's happening, but wanted to just put a bit more of what drives me and what drives us in place. Both John Kennedy and John Lewis in the past have talked about, if not us, who, and if not now, when. You've heard those quotes before. I think it's very telling here. We need to ask ourselves exactly those questions as we drive or transit home today. And for me, it gets added into what Prime Minister Carney had to say at the beginning of this year to the World Energy Forum, the idea of inflection points in history. Either we are at an inflection point in history right now, or we're not. If we're not, with respect to climate change and climate action, then some of the disturbing things that were in the early slides we showed you today, they are inevitable. Nobody's going to wake up tomorrow and say we invented fusion and we figured out how to take all the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it under the west coast of Canada. It ain't going to happen. So we're in big trouble. The scientists can't be wrong, and we need to address that and take our own roles. So if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And let's make this an inflection point, because if it is an inflection point, man, we're going to have good things to talk to our children, our grandchildren about, and that's the opportunity we really need to seize. So from there, just a reminder over the balance of the year, we mentioned a couple of times November the 9th is the annual forum, so we call this our working conference in the summer. Roll up the sleeves, let's find good things to do. The forum is strategic. It's all about how to get things done. Delighted to announce it's on the website, but Mark Pham from Oak Valley is our keynote this year and brings a really interesting perspective, just like Ronnie Cohn and Penny Ballum did before him. So coming here from the C-suite all the way down to the executive panels that we always assemble each year to tackle the tough questions, the resourcing questions, the policy questions. Once again, we'll reach out to governments and utility companies to join us from that, so we have a real conversation about moving forward. Again, what we're doing up to now has not been working. What do we need to do differently in the future? So we look forward to that. But there's another 3 webinars on the way over the course of the year as well. Please do join us from that. So those are online. November 9th, that's at the Westin Harbour Castle. It's in person, just like today. This for us is, we make by far the most progress. And those hospitals in the room that are not members, join us. We'd love to have you. The strength of greening healthcare is in the network effect. Every new hospital brings a whole bunch of experience, insights that the existing hospitals don't have, but gains from all of the experience from the 20 years that many of these hospitals have been working together trying to figure these things out. A lot of resources, a lot of experience available. Join us, make the whole stronger. And you know the contacts. I'm Ian Jarvis, the Executive Director of Climate Challenge Network. Heather Bell. Heather, are you still here? So Heather, you've seen all through the day. She's probably out at the desk ready to collect our cards. Heather is, if you're interested in exploring membership. Michael, you know, don't know how he does everything he does, but he stays connected with all of our member hospitals. And Amandeep, you've heard from a couple of times today, who's our Vice President of Engineering for all of this work. And of course, the most important part of all of this is you. Thank you so much for coming. Have a safe journey home and new beginnings tomorrow.